We called it Marrow. The deck plating had gone cold through my boots again, and I stood in the aft corridor with my breath showing in front of my face, while the panel on the wall told me the ship was a comfortable 68 degrees. I had run the heater diagnostic twice that watch. Both times it came back clean. Both times I stood there afterward and stared at the little cloud, leaving my mouth and hang and thin out and disappear, and I thought, that is not 68 degrees, that is closer to 40. And a panel does not lie unless something behind it is lying for it. I told myself it was the sensor. I told myself a lot of things that trip. My name is Doyle. On the crew roster, I was down as reclamation, which is a clean word for the man who keeps the air breathable and the water drinkable and the heat where it is supposed to be. If you have never lived on a working ship, that job sounds small. It is not small. On a survey tug 3 months out from anywhere, the difference between a good reclamation tech and a bad one is the difference between coming home and not. I was a good one. I want that on the record, whatever the record turns out to be worth, because most of what comes after is me being wrong about things. I would like at least one true thing standing at the front of it. The ship was the Ambit. She was old the way a good hammer is old, worn down to exactly what she was for and nothing else. A survey tug, built to go out to the dead edge of the system where the sun is just the brightest star in a sky full of them, park herself next to some rock nobody had ever named, and let the smart people aboard find out what it was made of. Company owned her. Company owned most things. We did not talk about the company much. You sign the contract, you take the long money, you go out past everything, and you come back with your teeth intact and your name on a bank account that finally has a number in it worth reading. I had a reason for the long money. Her name was Nell. She was 9 years old, and she lived with her aunt back on Ceres in a 2-room hab that smelled like other people's cooking, and she did not have a father who was there. She had a father who was out. There is a difference, and she was old enough to know it. Every ship's night I recorded a message for her. I could not send them. We were too far out and too far behind the relays for that, but I recorded them anyway and kept them, and the plan was that when I got home I would give her the whole stack at once, 100 and some little videos of her father talking to a camera in a cold room, and she could watch her old man miss her in order. It was a stupid plan. I loved it. I was going to buy us a place with real air and a window that looked at something. That was the whole reason I was out there at the edge of the dark instead of home where a father belongs. Hold on to that. It matters later, in the worst way a thing can matter. There were 7 of us aboard. Captain Halvorsen ran the ship. She was maybe 60, gray at the temples, quiet in the way that makes loud people nervous. She had been Navy before the company, some outfit that did not exist anymore, and she still stood her watches like a woman who expected the ship to be inspected. When Halvorsen said a thing, she said it once. I never once heard her raise her voice, and I never once saw anyone ignore her. Bell was my closest thing to a friend out there. Tomas Bell, rigger and outside hand, the man who went where the ship met the vacuum. He talked constantly. He had a joke for everything, most of them bad, and he told them in the same flat, cheerful way, whether he was fixing a coupling or eating reconstituted eggs or lying in a bunk at the end of a watch. Bell was the reason the long transits did not turn a crew into strangers. He carried a picture of a woman he was going to marry when he got back, and he showed it to you, whether you asked or not, and you were glad he did, because it reminded you that there was a whole warm world somewhere that all of us were only visiting. Cutter was the other rigger. Big man, older, gone quiet where Bell had gone loud. He had been doing outside work for 30 years, and he had the scars for it, a seam of shiny skin down one forearm where a line had let go once and taken a strip of him with it. Cutter did not like me much, and did not dislike me either. He liked the work and the money and being left alone, in that order. Marchetti flew us. Gia Marchetti. Small and fast and never quite still, chewing a pen cap or drumming 2 fingers on the console or humming under her breath. She was the best pilot I ever crewed with, and she was scared of the dark, which she would tell you herself, laughing like it was a funny thing about her instead of the truth. She kept a light on in her cabin all night. Out where we were going, that light was going to matter more than she knew. Sella was the medic, Marta Sella. She was the youngest of us except for me, and she had a way of looking at you when you told her you were fine that made you tell her the real answer instead. She was always reading. Not screens. Actual old paper books she had brought out with her, which cost a fortune to lift off a planet and which she guarded like a dragon. She would be the one to work it out, in the end. She would be the one to give the thing its rule. I have thought a lot about whether that made it worse for her, knowing before the rest of us. I think it did. And Okafor. Emeka Okafor was our survey officer, the reason for the whole trip, the man who had pulled a smear of numbers off a deep telescope 2 years before and would not let anyone rest until the company sent a ship to go look at what made the smear. He was brilliant and he was hungry, and it was the hunger I should have watched. Okafor did not want the long money. Okafor wanted his name on the thing. He wanted to be the man who touched it first. The thing was a planet, and it should not have been there. That was the whole of it, in the beginning. Out past the last cold rock anybody had bothered to chart, in a stretch of nothing so far from the sun that the sun could not warm it, and had never warmed it, there was a world, a big one. Bigger than our moon, smaller than Mars, dark all the way through. It gave off no light and almost no heat, and it had no business circling anything, because it was not circling anything. It had come in from outside, from between the stars. It had been falling through the black for longer than there had been a sun to fall away from, a whole world with the lights off, and by some accident of gravity and time it had drifted into the far edge of our system, where a hungry man with a telescope had caught the shape of it by the way it swallowed the stars behind it. Okafor called it a discovery. The company called it an asset. Marchetti called it the whole. She would look at the forward screen where the thing was starting to take up more and more of the nothing, a circle of pure black, darker than the black around it, a place where the stars simply stopped, and she would say, "There is the whole," and go quiet, and turn her music up. We did not call it Marrow yet. That came later, and it came from Sella, and I will tell you when. We had another reason to be out there, and it was the reason nobody liked to say out loud on the good days. 2 years back, when Okafor first found the smear, the company had not sent us. It had sent the Osprey. The Osprey was a survey ship like ours, a little newer, a little bigger, 8 aboard instead of 7. She went out ahead of us to make first contact with the thing, do the initial work, plant the flag, and the Osprey went dark. Not all at once. That was the part that got into you if you thought about it too long. She did not blow up, did not send a mayday, did not go quiet in one clean cut the way a ship does when a drive lets go. She got quieter. Her transmissions came in slower and stranger over the months, longer gaps, less in them, until the last few were just carrier signal with nobody talking, an open channel with a dead room on the other end. And then even that stopped. The company waited a decent interval, which for the company means until the insurance cleared, and then it put together a second contract and a second crew, and it did not put in the brief that we were flying 200 and some million kilometers to a place that had already eaten one ship's worth of people. It put in the brief that we were to complete the survey and recover the Osprey and her data if practicable. If practicable. I have kept that phrase. I take it out sometimes and look at it. So that is who we were and where we were going. 7 people in an old tug, 3 months and change from the nearest human being, closing on a world that had spent an eternity in the dark and had already shown us once what it did to visitors. And me in the aft corridor watching my breath and telling myself the sensor was bad. Here is the thing about the cold, and it has to be understood before the rest, because everything that happened turns on it. A ship this far out runs cool on purpose. Heat costs power, and power is the one thing you cannot make more of once the transit is set, so you keep the crew spaces at the low end of livable, and you wear layers and you get used to it. On the ambit, the working compartments ran around 60, 62, and the far corners of her, the storage bays and the aft runs, and the outside of the pressure hull, those ran colder. Cold enough, in the coldest stretches, to see your breath. That was normal. That was every long haul I had ever crewed. You learned to read a compartment by the little cloud in front of your face, and you did not think about it any more than you think about your own heartbeat, which is why it took us so long. The thing we were flying toward did not need to sneak. It was already wearing a disguise we had put on ourselves, years before we ever met it. It was already cold aboard. All it had to do was be a little colder, in the right place, on the right person, and we would look right at it and see nothing but a working ship on a long haul, doing what a working ship does. I finished the diagnostic a third time that watch. Clean. I pulled the panel off the wall and put my bare hand behind it against the conduit, and the metal was so cold it burned, and I stood there a while with my hand against it, and then I put the panel back and did not write it up. I want to be honest about that too. I did not write it up because writing it up meant a conversation with Halverson, and Halverson would want an answer, and I did not have one, and we were 40 hours out from the thing, and everyone was tight, and I did not want to be the man who added a ghost in the heating to a crew that was already not sleeping. I told myself I would find the sensor fault after we made our approach and things settled down. I have made a lot of small choices in my life that I would take back if the universe took returns. That is the one I take out and look at most. Not because it would have changed anything. I do not think it would have, but it was the first time I looked straight at the cold and decided to call it something else, and I would like to think I was a man who did not do that, and I have to live now with knowing I was. We made our approach on the tail end of third watch, in the dead middle of the ship's night, because that was when the numbers Okafor wanted lined up, and because Halverson wanted the crew rested for it and could not have both, so she took the numbers and let us be tired. I was awake anyway. I had been sleeping badly the whole transit, thin dreams I could not hold on to, and I had given up on the bunk and gone up to the observation blister on the dorsal spine, which was the one place on the ambit you could sit and look at the actual sky instead of a screen pretending to be one. The blister was cold. Of course it was. It was a bubble of glass and a folding seat stuck up on the back of the ship like a wart, and it ran near freezing all the time, and you brought a heated blanket up there or you did not stay. I brought the blanket. I sat with it around my shoulders, and I looked at the thing we were flying toward, and for the first time in 3 months I understood, in my body and not just on a screen, what we had come all this way to find. It was a wound in the stars. I do not have a better way to say it. Everywhere you looked, there were stars, thick as salt, spilled on a black table, the way they only get when you are far enough from any sun to see the whole depth of the galaxy at once. And then there was a place, dead ahead and growing, where there were none. Not dim ones, not red ones, none. A perfect round, nothing. A circle of black so complete that your eye kept trying to slide off it, kept trying to make it into a smudge on the glass or a floater in your own vision, and every time you forced your eye to hold still on it, you felt your gut turn over low, because it was not a smudge, and it was not in your eye. It was a world. It was a thing the size of a world with no light on it at all, and it was close enough now that it had edges, and the edges were where the stars stopped. I sat up there a long time. I did not hear Sella come up the ladder until she was next to me, and I jumped, and she said sorry, and sat down on the deck beside my seat, with her back against the curve of the glass, close enough that I could hear her breathing. She had a book in her hand, closed on one finger. "Can't sleep either," she said. "Not really." She looked up at the thing for a while. Her breath and mine both showed in the cold of the blister, 2 little clouds, and I remember watching them. I remember specifically watching both our breaths hang in the air and thin out, because I had breath on the brain that trip, and because it was a normal thing, a warm human thing, 2 people breathing in a cold room, and I was glad of it without knowing why. "You know what it reminds me of?" she said. "Not a planet. Planets have weather. They have a bright side. They turn. This just sits there. It reminds me of the inside of a bone. You ever break a big bone and see the inside of it, the marrow? That dark stuff down in the center where the blood gets made, it's like that. Like we're flying up to the inside of something that used to be alive. I did not say anything. I did not have anything. Marrow, she said, trying it out. Then she laughed a little at herself and opened her book and said, "Don't tell Okafor. He's got some Latin name picked out already. He's been practicing saying it in the mirror." I laughed too. It was a real laugh, the last easy one I can remember. Below us the ship murmured to herself the way ships do, and out ahead of us the dark place grew, and Sella was reading her paper book by the light of a hand torch with her breath fogging over the pages. And I sat wrapped in a heated blanket as the stars went out one edge at a time, and for a little while longer none of us knew anything, and it was the best I would feel for the rest of my life. I should set the crew down before I set down what happened to them, because it is not fair otherwise. It is not fair to lay out a list of names and then start crossing them off. You have to know what warm things they were first. That is the whole reason any of it is terrible. If they had been a list of names, it would only be sad. We ate together, all 7, once a day, ship supper, because Halverson made it a rule, and Halverson's rules were bones deep by the 3rd month. It did not matter what watch you were standing, you came to the wardroom for supper, or you had a reason, and there were no reasons. She had learned it in the Navy, she said, that a crew that eats apart comes apart, and she was right. I have crewed ships that had no such rule, and by the 3rd month they were 7 strangers sharing an air supply. We were not 7 strangers. We ate reconstituted everything off steel trays under lights that ran a little cold, and Bell made it bearable. Bell made it more than bearable. Bell made it the best part of the day. He carried a picture of the woman he was going to marry. Her name was Priya, and she worked in water reclamation on one of the Jupiter stations, which meant she and I did the same job on different worlds, and Bell thought that was the funniest thing in the universe, that his best friend and his future wife both spent their lives keeping other people's air breathable, and he would not let it go. My 2 reclaimers, he called us. He showed me her picture so many times I knew her face better than I knew some of my own family. A woman laughing with her hand half over her mouth, caught in the middle of it. And he would tell me about the wedding they were going to have when he got home, small, on the station, her mother's cooking. And the whole time he told it, his face did a thing it never did any other time. It went soft. It went young. And I understood that under all the bad jokes, Bell was the most serious man aboard, serious about exactly one thing, and that the jokes were how he carried the seriousness around without it crushing him. I showed him Nell. Not in person, she was 100 million kilometers away, but I had the recordings, the stack, and one supper when the whole wardroom was low, everyone tired and cold and 3 months from anywhere. I played him one, a short one, Nell at 7, with a gap in her teeth, telling me about a fish she had seen in the station aquarium, and Bell watched it twice and did not make a single joke. And then he said, "My 2 reclaimers are going to be the best parents on 2 worlds," and he clapped me on the shoulder, and Marchetti asked to see it. And then the whole wardroom watched a 7-year-old with a gap in her teeth talk about a fish. 7 grown people who fixed and flew and studied a dead world for a living, watching a little girl on Ceres. And nobody said anything for a while after, and it was not sad. It was the opposite of sad. It was the warm thing we had all come out into the dark to earn. Marchetti played music at supper, low, off a little speaker she had smuggled aboard. Old stuff, older than any of us, songs with real instruments in them. And she would hum along under her breath and drum on the table with 2 fingers. And if you asked her to turn it off because you had a headache, she would, but she would look wounded, and nobody asked more than once. Cutter did not talk at supper, but he was there, always, in the same seat, eating steady and slow. And once in a great while, somebody would land a joke just right, and Cutter would laugh. A short, surprised bark of a laugh, and it was like getting a medal. Making Cutter laugh, we kept a running tally of who had done it last. Okafor talked about the Marrow. He could not help it. It was the only thing in his head, and we let him, mostly, because a man in love is a man in love, even if what he loves is a dark rock 100 million kilometers away, and because when Okafor talked about it, he made you see it, the wonder of it. a whole world come in from between the stars, and for a few minutes at supper the thing we were flying toward was a marvel and not a grave. And Sella would read at the table, which was against the spirit of Halvorsen's rule, if not the letter, and Halvorsen let it go, because Sella would read to us. That was the thing. She would find a passage in one of her paper books and read it out loud between courses, a paragraph, a page, something that had struck her, and her voice was good for it, low and even, and we would all stop and listen. 7 people in a cold wardroom at the edge of everything, listening to a young woman read out loud from a book somebody had printed on paper on a planet none of us had seen in a year. Those are the suppers I go back to, not the horror. The horror I cannot keep out, and do not try to anymore. But when I want to visit them, when I want to sit with them again, it is always a supper. Belle's soft young face talking about a wedding, Marchetti humming, Cutter's surprised bark of a laugh, Okafor making a grave into a marvel, Halvorsen at the head of the table with her hands folded watching her crew be a crew, and Sella reading out loud in the cold while all our breath fogged over the pages. 7 little clouds, 7 warm things reading in the dark. That is who they were. Now I will tell you what happened to them. We reached the Osprey the next day. She was right where the Osprey's last useful transmission had put her, a little under 1,000 kilometers off the surface of the dark world, in a slow tumble that told you all by itself that nobody was flying her anymore. Marchetti brought us up on her careful, all thrusters and patience, the way you approach a thing that might still be dangerous even though every reading said it was dead. We had the Osprey on the forward screen for 2 hours before we were close enough to see her with our own eyes, and in that 2 hours nobody on the ambit said much of anything. She was intact. That was the first wrong thing, and it was Halvorsen who said it, standing behind Marchetti with her arms crossed, her eyes on the other ship as it grew in the screen. She's whole, Halvorsen said. No breach, no scoring. Look at her. Whatever happened to that crew, it didn't happen to the ship. She was whole. She hung there in the starlight, her hull the same dull working gray as ours, her running lights dark, her big survey dish still pointed at the black world below her like she had died looking at it. No holes, no burns, no sign of the 1,000 violent things that kill a ship in deep space. She looked like a ship whose crew had simply stepped out for a minute and forgotten to come back, except that the minute had been the better part of 2 years. We matched her tumble and closed the last of the distance and got a hard dock on her aft lock after 3 tries, because she was turning and we had to turn with her. And Marchetti did it with her tongue between her teeth and her light on in the cabin behind her, even though it was the middle of the day by the ship's clock. When the locks mated there was a long groan through both hulls, metal finding metal, and then a hiss as the seal took, and then quiet. Halvorsen put together the boarding party in the wardroom, herself, Okafor, Belle, Cutter, and me. Sella stayed aboard the ambit to run medical from our side in case anybody found anything that needed a medic, and Marchetti stayed on the flight deck because you do not leave a docked ship without a pilot, ever. That is a rule older than any of us. We suited up. Not full outside suits, because the Osprey showed as pressurized and holding, but soft suits with helmets, sealed, our own air, because you do not breathe another ship's air until you know what happened to the people who breathed it last. That was Halvorsen's call, and it was the right one, and it is probably the only reason any of us got as far as we did. I remember the helmets fogging as we suited up in the ambit's lock, all 5 of us, 5 little blooms of breath, on the inside of 5 faceplates, there and gone as the helmet heaters caught up and cleared them. I remember it because it was the last time I would ever see it and think nothing of it. After the Osprey, I never saw faceplate fog again without my whole body going cold, and I mean that as exactly as I can say it. My actual body, my skin, cold, every time, for the rest of my life. The Osprey's aft lock cycled fine. Her systems were on standby, not dead, running on a trickle from batteries that should have been flat a year ago and were not, which was another wrong thing, but we did not know enough yet to count it. The inner door opened onto her aft corridor, and Halvorsen went first with a hand torch, and the rest of us came after, and the cold came out to meet us. I felt it through the suit. That should not be possible. A soft suit is built to hold your own heat against the chill of a cool ship. It is not much, but it is enough that you do not feel a 60-degree corridor as cold. I felt the Osprey as cold. I felt it come through the suit and touch me, and I looked at the little readout on my wrist that showed the outside temperature, and it said the number, and I did not believe the number, and then I did believe it, and I wished I had not looked. 40 below. Inside a pressurized ship, with the air still holding, the Osprey's corridors were 40 degrees below zero. There was frost on everything. Not the thin skin of frost you get on a cold surface where a little moisture has settled. Thick frost, furred, grown, standing up off the walls and the pipes and the deck in feathers and needles a finger deep, white going to gray in the torchlight, so that the whole corridor looked like the inside of a freezer that had been left running and forgotten in some house where all the people had died. Our torches cut through it, and the frost threw the light back at us in 1,000 small glitters, and where we breathed, even inside the suits, even with the helmets sealed, I swear the cold pressed in closer, like it was interested. Air is holding, but it's freezing, Okafor said over the suit channel. His voice was doing a thing I did not like. It was too fast. This is incredible. Do you understand what this means? The heat's been pulled out of her. Not lost. Lost heat radiates away, and you can measure the loss curve. This isn't a loss curve. It's like something drank it. It's like the heat was... That's enough, Okafor, Halvorsen said. Not unkind. Just once, the way she said things. Okafor stopped talking. We went forward. The Osprey was the same ship as ours, near enough, same builder, same bones, and walking her frozen corridors was like walking through a nightmare version of the ambit. My own home turned white and dead and cold. We passed cabins. The doors were open, most of them, and inside were bunks with the blankets thrown back and personal things set out on the little shelves, a woman's hair clip, a deck of playing cards, a child's drawing stuck to a bulkhead, with tape gone brittle in the cold, and all of it furred white with that grown frost. And no people. We passed the galley. There were mugs on the table, 5 of them, set out in a row, and they were full, and what was in them had frozen solid, and the ice in the mugs was not the brown of coffee or the pale of water. It was clear. Somebody had set out 5 mugs of clear water and let them freeze, or somebody had set out 5 mugs of something, and the cold had taken everything out of it but the ice. I did not look too long at the mugs. Bell did. Bell stood over the mugs a while, and he did not make a joke, and that was the first time on that ship I felt truly afraid, because Bell always made a joke, and he looked at those 5 mugs of clear ice, and he had nothing to say. We found the message in the main corridor amidships, where the crew of a ship spends most of its walking life. Somebody had written on the wall. Not on a screen, on the actual wall, on a bare stretch of bulkhead between 2 conduit runs, in grease pencil, the fat black kind we all carried for marking gear. The letters were shaky, big and shaky, the way you write when your hands are cold or you are afraid, or both. The frost had grown over part of it, but you could still make out the words, and I made them out, and I did not understand them, and I have understood nothing better in my life since. It said, "Watch the glass." Under that, smaller, shakier, like the hand had gotten worse in the time between the 2 lines, it said, "If it does not fog, it is not him." We stood in a row and looked at it, 5 of us, breathing, our helmets clear, the frost glittering all around, and that message on the wall in a dead man's shaky hand. "What glass?" Cutter said. It was the first thing he had said since we boarded. "What's it mean? Watch the glass." Nobody answered him, because nobody knew. Okafor wanted to go for the survey data. Halvorsen wanted the ship's log. They were the same argument they always had, the science against the record, and Halvorsen won it the way she always did, by not raising her voice and by being the captain. And we went forward to the Osprey's command deck to pull her log, and Okafor came along because Halvorsen was not going to let him wander a dead ship alone, and he knew it. The command deck was where we found the first one. He was in the pilot's chair. He had strapped himself in, which is a thing you do when you know you are going to stop being able to hold yourself in place, when you know you are going to die and you do not want to float around your own ship afterward. And he had folded his hands in his lap, and he had died sitting up, looking out the forward port at the dark world below. The frost had grown over him, too. It stood up off him in the same white feathers as everything else, off his shoulders and his folded hands and the top of his head, so that at first, in the torchlight, he did not even look like a man. He looked like a shape the frost had made, a snowman somebody had left sitting in a chair. Then Halverson's torch found his face, and he had a face, frozen, calm, eyes closed, a man who had died without fighting it. And behind him, through the forward port, the black world hung there, filling the whole sky. And I understood that this man had sat in this chair and watched that thing, and let the cold take him, and had been sitting there with it ever since. His face plate was up. He had not been wearing his helmet. But his breath, if he had had any breath at that last, would have fogged the glass of the port in front of him, and there was no fog on the glass. There was frost, grown thick. And I remember thinking, watch the glass, and I remember thinking it did not fog, and I did not put it together, not yet, and I hate that I did not, and I could not have done anything if I had. Okafor found the log terminal and got it running off our own suit power because the Osprey's was too cold to trust, and Halverson stood over the frozen pilot a while, and then she reached out one gloved hand and gently closed the man's eyes further, which they did not need, they were already closed, but I understood the gesture. She was a captain looking at another ship's dead. She was making a promise she did not say out loud. We pulled what we could of the log. Most of it was corrupt, frozen, the storage gone bad in the cold. But Okafor got chunks of it, and we took the chunks back aboard the Ambit, and we cycled off the Osprey and sealed our lock behind us, and undocked and stood off from her a clean 2 kilometers. And I have never in my life been so glad to be back inside a warm ship, except the Ambit was not warm. The Ambit was 60 and holding, and my breath was showing in the aft corridor, and I still had not written it up. That night, ship's night, all 7 of us crowded into the wardroom, and Okafor put the recovered pieces of the Osprey's log up on the big screen, and we watched a crew we had never met find out, a little at a time, what we were about to find out ourselves. The pieces came out of order. Okafor tried to sort them by timestamp and gave up, because the cold had scrambled the timestamps too, so what we got was a dead crew's last month shuffled like a deck and dealt out at random, and I think that made it worse. You could not brace yourself. One clip would be a woman laughing at something off camera, ordinary, alive, and the next would be a man with frost in his eyebrows whispering into the lens at 3 a.m. And you had no way to know which came first, which was the woman before and which was the man after, so the whole thing existed at once. The before and the after laid on top of each other, the way I have carried it ever since. The Osprey's captain was a man named Adeyemi. We learned his name because the crew said it, and because in the early clips he was clearly the man in charge, steady, dryly funny, the kind of captain a crew relaxes around. In the early clips, everyone was fine. They had made their approach same as us. They had been thrilled. All of them. Okafor thrilled all over again watching them be thrilled. Because they were the first human beings ever to lay eyes on a world from between the stars. And they knew it, and they were giddy with it. They named it. Not Marrow. They called it Adeyemi's World for about a day, as a joke, and then they called it The Quiet. And that name stuck for them, The Quiet. And hearing them say it made the hair stand up on my arms. Because it was a good name, it was the right name, and they had not known yet how right. They went down to the surface. That was the part I made myself watch closest, because I knew we were going to do the same thing, and I wanted to see what it did to them. The surface footage was bad. Not bad quality. Bad. It was a helmet camera on somebody walking across the quiet in the dark, and there was nothing to see because there was nothing there. No light, no color. Just the small circle of a suit torch sliding across the ground. That was black and smooth and went on forever, and the sound of the man breathing, and every so often the man saying a number into his log, a temperature. and the temperature going down and down and down past anything that made sense. 200 below, 230. The ground of the quiet was within a few degrees of as cold gets, the cold of deep space itself, because it had been falling through deep space since before the sun was lit, and nothing had ever warmed it, not once, not for a single second in all that time. And these people in their suits walked across it, 5 little sparks of heat, the only warm things that had ever stood on that whole dark world, and I watched the helmet camera and I thought, it must have felt us. 5 warm things, after all that time. It must have felt us like you feel a match struck in a freezing room. They brought back a sample, a core, drilled out of the surface, a black cylinder the length of your forearm, and they were proud of it. They passed it around, and in one clip, a young man is holding it up to the camera grinning, and you can see, if you look, that it is fuming. Not smoking, fuming. A thin white haze coming off it, sliding down off the black core like water running downhill, pooling. And the young man does not notice because he is grinning at the camera. And the haze is the ship's own warm air freezing where it touches the core and falling as it freezes. And that core is drinking the heat right out of the room and no one is watching it do it. That is where the good clips stop. There's no clean line. No single moment where it all goes wrong, and I think that is the truest and most terrible thing the Osprey's log taught me. It does not come for you in a moment, it comes for you in a temperature. After the sample, the crew starts to get cold. You can see it. They are wearing more. The frost starts, first in the corners, then everywhere. Captain Adeyemi orders the heat up, and the heat does not hold. There is a clip of the reclamation tech, my opposite number, a heavyset woman with tired eyes, and she is saying into the log that the heat plant is fine. She has checked it a dozen times. The heat plant is producing exactly what it should. The ship is just not getting warmer. The heat is going somewhere, and she does not know where, and she is scared. And she keeps saying the heat plant is fine. Like if she says it enough, it will start to matter. I knew her. I did not know her. She was dead 2 years, but I knew her all the way down because I was her. I had stood in my own cold corridor running the same clean diagnostic and telling myself the same true useless thing. The heat plant is fine, 68 degrees. The panel does not lie. And then the crew starts to notice each other. This is the part where they worked it out, and it is the part that gave us the rule, and I am going to tell it the way they told it because they earned that. They paid for every word. There is a clip, late, everything furred with frost. The wardroom of the Osprey, and 4 of the crew are sitting around the table, and one of them is filming on a handheld, and the mood is wrong. Everyone tight, everyone watching everyone. And a woman, the one who laughed in the early clips, she is talking, and she says, I am telling you there is something wrong with Rourke. And a man off camera says, Rourke is fine, and the woman says, no, listen to me. Watch him. Watch Rourke when he thinks nobody is looking. He stands by the reactor bulkhead. He stands there with his hands out like he is warming them at a fire for hours. And when you talk to him, he answers a beat too late, like he is translating. And I have been watching him and Marta. I have been watching him breathe. Her name was Marta, too. The dead woman. Same as Arcella. I felt Sella go still next to me when the clip said it. Neither of us said anything. And the dead Marta on the screen says, we breathe out, and it fogs. In the cold like this it fogs, you can see it, we all fog, look. And she breathes at the camera, and a little cloud shows, and the man off camera breathes, and a little cloud shows, and she says, everybody in this room fogs when they breathe. Rourke does not fog. I have watched him for 2 days. Rourke has not fogged the air one time in 2 days. Rourke does not breathe. There is a silence on the clip, a long one. You can hear the ship ticking and settling in the cold. And then a voice, a new voice, flat and pleasant and a little slow, says, that is not true, Marta. Of course I breathe. And the handheld swings around fast to a man sitting a little apart from the others, near the reactor bulkhead, with his hands held out in front of him toward the warm metal, and the man is smiling. And the camera holds on him, and he looks into it, calm, pleasant, patient, and the room has gone dead quiet, and everyone is watching his mouth, and he opens his mouth to say something else, some reasonable thing, and out of his mouth comes nothing, no cloud, no fog, nothing at all. In a room so cold that every other breath hangs visible in the air, the man called Rourke speaks a full sentence, and the air in front of his face does not so much as stir. The clip ends there. Okafor tried the next several pieces, and they were corrupt, all of them, a whole run of them, gone to noise, and I have wondered since whether that was the cold or whether it was something else, whether the thing that was aboard the Osprey did not want that part seen, and then I tell myself a temperature cannot want anything, and then I remember the man's patient smile, and I am not sure a temperature is all it was. We got one more clean piece. It was Captain Adeyemi, alone, in his cabin, his helmet on and sealed even though he was inside his own ship, frost in the seams of it, his face gone gray and thin. He was not talking to the log, he was talking to whoever came after. He was talking to us, though he could not have known it would be us, and I have his words by heart. If you are hearing this, he said, then you came out here after us, and I am sorry because it means the company did not tell you, and it means you are already aboard, and it means you have already been out on the surface, because they would not have sent you if you had not, and that means it is already here, on your ship, with you, right now, and you do not know it yet. It came aboard on the core. Do not bring anything aboard. It is too late for us to tell you that, but I am telling you anyway. It does not kill you the way the cold kills you. It gets into the warm places. It gets into a person, and it puts the person out, like you put out a lamp, and then it wears the person. It wears them, and it walks them around, and it uses them to get closer to the rest of you, to the heat of you, because that is all it wants. It wants the warm. It has been cold for longer than there has been anything to be warm, and it wants in. And you cannot tell. You cannot tell by looking. They look right. They sound almost right. There is only one tell, and I am going to give it to you, and then I am going to go sit with my crew, what is left of them, what is left of them that is still them, because I am the captain, and that is the job. He leaned close to the camera. His breath fogged the inside of his faceplate. I saw it. He was still him. Watch the glass, he said. When it is cold enough to see your breath, watch each other breathe. A living person fogs the glass. A living person fogs the air in front of their face every time they cannot help it. It is what warm blood does. The thing does not, whatever it wears, however right it looks, it does not breathe, and it cannot fake breath. So watch the glass. If a man's breath does not show, he stopped being a man a while back. Watch the glass, and God help you, and I am sorry. The clip ended. The wardroom of the Ambit was dead silent. 7 of us. I looked around. I could not help it. I looked around the table at the 6 other faces, and it was cold in the wardroom, 62 on the panel, and colder than that in my lungs. And I watched. Halvorsen breathed. A cloud. Marchetti breathed. Fast and shallow. Scared. A cloud. Cutter. A cloud. Sella beside me. A cloud. And she was watching too. I could see her watching. Okafor. A cloud. Bell. I watched Bell longest, and I do not know why, except that he was my friend, and I loved him, and some animal part of me had already started keeping score. Bell was looking at the dark screen where the dead captain had been. His face was doing something I had never seen it do. It was still. Bell's face was never still. And I watched him, and I waited, and after a moment he breathed, and a cloud showed, faint, but it showed, and I let out a breath of my own that I had not known I was holding, and I told myself I was being insane. We had been aboard the Osprey for 2 hours. We had not been to the surface. We had not brought anything aboard. The captains warning was for the Osprey's crew and not for us. We were fine. We had not been to the surface. That was true that night. 2 of us went the next day. Halvorsen decided we needed a sample of our own to complete the survey over Sella's objection. And I want to be fair to Halvorsen because she is not here to be fair to herself. She did not ignore the warning, she took it dead serious. She ordered that whatever we brought back would stay in the outer sample lock, sealed, never inside the crew spaces, and that the party would decontaminate in vacuum before they came back through, and that only 2 would go, minimum exposure, and that the 2 would be watched every hour, the glass test, the whole crew watching them fog, for as long as it took, to be sure. It was a good plan. It was a careful plan made by a careful captain who had listened to a dead man's warning and believed it. It failed anyway, and it failed for the most ordinary reason in the world, which is that a person got cold and did a small human thing without thinking, and that is all it takes. That is all it ever takes. The 2 who went were Bell and Cutter, the riggers. It was their job, outside work was theirs, and there was never any question it would be them. I helped them suit up in the outer lock, full hard suits this time, the good ones, and I checked their seals myself, twice, and I remember Bell fogging his faceplate as it sealed and the heater clearing it. And I remember thinking, there, see, he fogs, he is fine, and being ashamed of the thought, and having it anyway. They went down on the survey boat, the little short-range craft we carried for exactly this, and Marchetti flew them, and she did not go down to the surface herself. She held the boat 100 meters up and let them go down the last of it on suit thrusters, because Halvorsen had ordered that too. Keep the boat clean, keep the pilot clear. I stayed on the ambit and followed their helmet feeds on the wardroom screen with the rest of the crew, and it was exactly like the Osprey's footage, exactly. 2 little torches sliding across a black ground that went on forever, and the temperature readouts falling and falling, and Bell's voice on the channel, and Bell being Bell. 3 months of tension breaking out of him, the only way it knew how, started telling a joke. I do not remember the joke. I have tried. It was a bad one. They were all bad ones. And he was halfway through it, out there on the coldest ground in the reach of the sun, drilling a core out of a dead world, and Cutter told him to shut up and drill. And Bell laughed, and that is the last easy sound I have of my friend Bell laughing at his own bad joke 200 below on the surface of the quiet. Here is what went wrong. It was so small. They got the core, a black cylinder fuming white, just like the Osprey's, and they bagged it in a sealed containment sleeve the way Halvorsen had ordered, and they started back up to the boat on their thrusters. And Bell's suit threw a fault. A glove seal. The left glove, the readout said, a pressure drop, small, slow, the kind of thing that is an emergency but not a right now emergency. You have got minutes. You have got time to get to the boat and get inside and get the glove off. And Bell knew that Bell had 30 years of outside work behind him, same as Cutter. Bell did everything right. He called the fault, he kept his head, he made for the boat, but his hand got cold. That fast, at 200 below, a breach in a glove, and the hand goes cold that fast, and it hurt the way deep cold hurts, like a burn, and Bell was a man, and his hand was screaming at him. And somewhere in the last few meters before the boat, on the feed, I watched my friend do the smallest, most human, most fatal thing. He took his other hand, his good hand, his sealed hand, and he clapped it over the breached glove and squeezed to hold the seal, to stop the pain, the way you grab a cut finger, just for a second, just reflex. And in that second, the black dust of the quiet, the fine frost of it that had gotten onto the core and onto his breached glove, that second it had contact, warm suit to cold breech to bare frozen skin. And I did not know I was watching it happen. None of us did. It looked like a man in pain grabbing his own hand. It looked like nothing. It looked like the most natural thing in the world. They got to the boat. Marchetti flew them back. They decontaminated in the outer lock, vacuum, and hard radiation, the full cycle, and the sample went into the sealed sample locker and never came into the ship, exactly per the plan. And the plan was perfect, and the plan did not matter because the thing was not in the sample anymore. The thing was in the small red frostbitten place on the back of Bell's left hand, and Bell came back aboard through the lock with the rest of us clapping him on the shoulder and telling him good work. And Sella looked at his hand and wrapped it and gave him a shot for the pain. And that night, in the wardroom, we ran the glass test on both of them, an hour at a time, all of us watching. And Bell fogged the glass every time, and Cutter fogged the glass every time, and we decided they were clean, and we were right about Cutter, and we were wrong about Bell. And the difference was only a matter of time, because the thing was in him now, and it was cold, and it was patient, and it had all the time there ever was. The thing about a slow change is that you live inside it, and inside it there is no change at all. There is only the way things are, adjusting a little every day, so slow that each day looks exactly like the one before. You do not see the water heating. You are the frog. I have thought about that a great deal, and it does not make me feel better, but it is true, and I am trying to tell only true things. Bell got quieter over the next 4 days. That was the first of it, and it was the easiest thing in the world to explain, because a man who has just frostbitten his hand 200 below on a dead world is entitled to be quiet. Sella changed his dressing every day, and the frostbite was healing wrong, she said, not getting worse, not getting infected, just not healing the way flesh heals. The skin over the red place, going a strange waxy pale, cool to the touch, even when the rest of him was warm. She showed me once, when Bell was asleep, because she wanted another set of eyes, and because she trusted me. "Feel that," she said, and I put a finger on the back of Bell's sleeping hand near the frostbite, and it was cold, colder than a sleeping man's hand should be. And I took my finger away and did not want to put it back. He craved heat. That was the second thing, and it came on so gradual that we made jokes about it before we got scared of it. Bell took to sitting by the reactor bulkhead in the number 2 passage, the warmest spot on the ambit, a stretch of wall behind which the drive plant ran hot, and he sat there on an upturned crate with his back against the warm metal and his frostbitten hand held out flat against it, palm to the wall, for hours. At first we ribbed him about it. Cutter called him the cat. "He does that," Cutter said. "My grandmother's cat did that, found the one warm spot in the house and owned it." And Bell would smile when we said it, a beat late, and go back to sitting with his palm to the warm wall, and I would walk past on my rounds, and the passage would be colder around him than it was 10 meters either way. Noticeably colder, my breath thickening as I came up on him and thinning as I passed, and I told myself the reactor shielding was uneven, which was a real thing that happened, and which I checked, and which was fine. The whole ship got colder. That was the third thing, and it was the one that was mine, the one I could not blame on frostbite or a hard trip. My heat plant was producing exactly what it should. I want to say that clearly because I said it 100 times that week, out loud and in my head, and every time I said it I heard the dead reclamation tech from the Osprey saying it in her tired, scared voice. "The heat plant is fine, the heat plant is fine," and knowing I sounded exactly like her did not stop me saying it, because it was true. The plant was fine. The heat was going somewhere. 60 on the panels became 58, became 55, and I chased it through every system on the ship, and I found nothing, because there was nothing to find, because the thing that was drinking my heat did not show up on any gauge I had. It showed up as a red waxy place on the back of my friend's hand, and a cold spot in the number 2 passage, and a man who sat with his palm to a warm wall for hours and answered you a beat too late. A beat too late. That was the fourth thing, and it was the one that finally frightened me in a way I could not talk myself out of, because I had heard it before. I had heard the dead Marta on the Osprey's log say it about the man called Rourke. He answers a beat too late, like he is translating, and now here was Bell doing exactly that, and I could not unhear it. You would say something to Bell, some ordinary thing, pass the wrench, want coffee, and there would be a pause, short, so short you would miss it if you were not listening, and then he would answer, correctly, pleasantly, but with that little gap in front of it, like the words had to travel further to reach him than they used to, like somewhere between your mouth and his, understanding there was a cold country the words had to cross. I did not say anything. I want to be honest about why. It was not only fear, though it was fear. It was love. He was my friend. And there's a thing that happens when someone you love starts to change wrong. Whether it is this, or whether it is drink, or sickness, or the slow, ordinary way people leave you, there is a thing that happens where you become the last one to admit it, precisely because you love them. Because admitting it feels like a betrayal, like you are the one doing the changing, turning your friend into a stranger with your own suspicion. So I watched Bell answer a beat too late and sit with his palm to the warm wall, and I told myself he was tired, he was hurt, he was 3 months from a woman he wanted to marry, and I said nothing, and the ship got colder, and the days went by. We still had supper. That is the part I go back to and cannot make sense of, how we kept having supper while it was happening, how the ritual held even as the thing under it rotted. Halvorson's rule was bones deep, and none of us wanted to be the one to break it, and there was a worse reason too, which nobody said, which was that supper was where we could all watch each other, all 7 at one table, in a cold room where every breath showed, and none of us wanted to give up the 1 hour a day we could see everyone breathe at once. So we came to the wardroom, and we ate off our steel trays, and it was a corpse of a supper with the life gone out of it and the shape of it still walking around. Bell did not tell jokes anymore. That was the loudest silence in the room. Bell not talking. Bell sitting at his usual place with his tray in front of him barely touched, because he had stopped eating much. Another thing I told myself was the hurt hand and the hard trip. He sat closest to the reactor bulkhead now. He had moved his seat. Nobody remembered him moving it, but there it was, his tray a foot closer to the warm wall than it used to be. And he ate slow and kept his eyes on us. And when Marchetti put her music on, low, the old stuff with the real instruments, Bell turned his head toward the little speaker with an expression I could not place, like a man listening to a language he used to speak, and Marchetti caught him doing it and turned the music off herself, unasked, for the first time ever, and did not put it back on, and the wardroom ate in a quiet so complete you could hear the ship ticking in the cold. Okafor filled the quiet because Okafor could not stand a quiet, and he talked about the Marrow, only now it was wrong the way everything was getting wrong, because he did not talk about the wonder of it anymore. The world come in from between the stars. He talked about the cold. He talked about how the heat loss curves were beautiful. He used that word beautiful, about the thing eating our ship. And Halvorsen said his name once, Okafor, and he stopped and looked down at his tray. And I remember Sella looking at him a long moment across the table with her clever, frightened eyes. And I did not know yet that she was already watching Okafor too, already keeping her own quiet score, already afraid of more than one seat at the table. Cutter did not laugh. Nobody tried to make him. The running tally of who had made Cutter laugh last, that had been a warm, foolish thing we did, and it was gone. It had died without any of us noticing it die. The way the good things went. Not with a moment, but with a temperature. And Sella did not read out loud. She still brought a book to the table. She held it in her lap under the edge like a hand to hold, but she did not open it and read to us, because reading out loud is a warm thing you do for people you are not afraid of. And we had all started, every one of us, to be a little afraid of each other, to sit at supper doing sums under the table, watching the air in front of 6 other faces, keeping score, and you do not read out loud to a table that is keeping score. One supper, near the end of those days before we ran the glass test right, Halvorsen tried to bring it back. She was the captain, and she could feel the crew coming apart the way she could feel a ship coming apart through her feet. And she tried. She asked Bell about the wedding. She said it gently, into the awful quiet. She said, "Bell, tell us about the wedding. Tell us about Priya's mother's cooking. You have been promising us that cooking for 3 months." And it was a kindness. It was Halvorsen reaching a hand across the table to a man she was already more than half sure was gone, giving him a chance to be Bell one more time, giving all of us a chance to hear it. And the whole table went still and waited, and Bell turned his head from the warm wall and looked at the captain, and there was a pause. The pause, the little cold country the words had to cross. And then Bell said, in a voice that was almost his voice, "She makes a fish stew." And that was all. She makes a fish stew. 4 words, flat, correct, a fact retrieved from somewhere far away and set down on the table, and no soft young look, no light in the face, nothing under it, just the 4 words, and then Bell turned his head back to the warm wall, and Priya's whole wedding, the small station wedding with her mother's cooking that Bell had built for us 100 times until we could all taste it, was gone, was a fish stew, was a fact in a dead man's mouth. And I looked down at my tray, and I could not eat, and across the table I heard Sella quietly close the book she had never opened. And I knew, we all knew, we had known for days, and would not say it. And the not saying it had run out, and it ran out at supper, over 4 flat words about a fish stew, in a cold room with everyone's breath showing but one. Sella did not have love to stop her, or she had a different kind, the kind that is a job. She was the medic, and it was her job to notice bodies going wrong, and Bell's body was going wrong, and she noticed. She came to me on the 5th day, in the reclamation bay, which was one of the last warm places left because it was next to my heat plant, and she shut the hatch behind her and stood with her back against it. And she was holding one of her paper books against her chest with both arms, the way a kid holds a book, and she was scared. "His core temperature is 91, she said. She said it flat, the way you say a thing you have been carrying alone too long. I took it 3 times. I calibrated the reader against myself and against you when you were not looking. I am sorry, and it reads us both at 98.6 like it should. Bell is 91. Doyle, 91 degrees is not a fever, and it is not a chill. 91 degrees core is hypothermia, real hypothermia, the kind where a person is confused and slurring and going down. And Bell is walking around, he is eating, he is talking to us. A man cannot be at 91 and be fine. It is not possible. The body does not work at 91, and he is fine, and every day it is a little lower, and I do not have a name for what that is." "I have a name for it," I said, and I did not want to say it, and I said it anyway, because she had carried it alone long enough, and it was not fair to make her carry the saying of it too. "It is the thing off the Osprey. It came aboard on Bell's hand. The glove seal, the surface. You were there for the log, same as me. It is in him. And it is getting into the ship. That is my heat. That is where my heat is going. It is not lost. Something is drinking it. The captain said it drinks the warm. Adeyemi said it. It gets into the warm places. And Bell is a warm place, and my ship is a warm place, and it is drinking us both." Sella did not argue. That was the worst part, I think, that she did not argue. Because if there had been any good reason to think I was wrong, she would have found it. She was smarter than me and more careful, and she wanted to be wrong even more than I did. She just stood against the hatch with her book against her chest, and she said, "Then we tell Halvorsen tonight. And we run the glass test on Bell, and this time we run it right, and we do not decide he is clean because we want him to be." We told Halvorsen that night. All of it. Sella laid out the medical, the core temperature, the frostbite that would not heal, and I laid out the heat loss, and Halvorsen listened the way she listened, without a word, sitting at the head of the wardroom table with her hands folded. And when we were done, she was quiet for a long moment, and then she said the thing that made me trust her all the way to the end. Whatever the end turned out to be. She said, "I have been watching him too." She had. Of course she had. She was the captain, and she had listened to Adeyemi's warning harder than any of us, and she had been watching her whole crew since the moment that clip ended, quietly, the way she did everything, and she had seen exactly what we had seen, and she had been waiting, because she was not a woman who moved on a suspicion, she was a woman who moved on a certainty, and she had wanted to be sure before she did a thing that could not be undone, because that was the shape of it, and she saw the shape of it before I did. If Bell was gone, if the thing had put him out and was wearing him, then there was no fixing it. Adeyemi had made that plain. It puts the person out like a lamp, and you do not relight a lamp, and that meant that being sure was not the end of the problem. Being sure was the start of a much worse one. Being sure meant that the captain of the Ambit was going to have to decide what to do with a member of her crew who was not a member of her crew anymore, who wore his face and his voice and his bad jokes. And there is no good thing to do about that. There is only the least bad thing, and Halverson knew she was going to have to be the one to choose it. We ran the glass test that night, and we did it the way Sella said, right, without wanting the answer. Halverson called the whole crew to the wardroom, all 7, because you do not single out one person for a test like that. You do not walk up to a man and say, "We think you are not a man anymore. Prove you breathe." Not if you have any decency, and Halvorsen had decency. It was the bones of her. So she called it as a crew check. She stood at the head of the table, and she said, plainly, that the Osprey's log had given us reason to be careful, and that from tonight we were all going to check each other, every night. The way Adeyemi said, and that it was nobody's insult and everybody's protection, and that she would go first. And she breathed. And in the cold of the wardroom, 54 now on the panel and dropping, her breath fogged the air in front of her face, a clear white cloud. And she held it there long enough for all of us to see, and then she said, Marchetti. And we went around the table. Marchetti breathed, a cloud, and I heard her let out a little shaking laugh after relief, the specific relief of proving you are still yourself. Cutter, a cloud. Okafor, a cloud. And he was annoyed by the whole thing. He had a real sample of the thing sealed in a locker 40 meters away, and he thought watching people breathe was superstition, and he breathed his annoyed cloud and rolled his eyes. Sella, a cloud. Me, a cloud. And I did not know until I did it how frightened I was that mine would not show, how I had lain awake, pressing my cold hands together wondering. And it showed. It fogged. I was still me, and the relief of it went through me like a drug. And then Bell, everyone was looking at him. He knew it. Of course he knew it. We had all been not watching him for 5 days, and now we were all watching him at once, and there was no pretending otherwise. And Bell sat there at the wardroom table with his frostbitten hand wrapped in Sella's white dressing, and he looked around at all of us looking at him, and his face did the still thing, the thing it had learned to do, and then he smiled. A beat too late, and he said, "This is about me," and the words came across that little cold country before they reached us, and nobody answered him, and he looked at Halverson, and Halverson looked back at him with a face like a closed door, and she said, "Breathe for us, Bell." And Bell breathed, and it fogged. I saw it. We all saw it. A cloud, faint, fainter than the rest of ours, but there, a real cloud of breath in the cold air in front of my friend's face, and the wardroom let out a sound, a collective breath of its own, relief, and Marchetti said, "Thank God," under hers, and I felt the fear go out of me so fast it left me dizzy, and Bell smiled around at all of us, forgiving us, and I loved him, and I was ashamed, and I was so relieved I could have cried. And Sella did not move. Sella sat dead still with her hands flat on the table, and she was not looking at the cloud in front of Bell's face. She was looking at his chest. And after a moment, in a voice so quiet I almost missed it, she said, "Do it again." The wardroom went cold in a different way. Bell looked at her. Everyone looked at her. And Sella, still quiet, still looking at his chest and not his face, said, "Breathe again, Bell. Please, just breathe again for me." And Bell said, "I already breathed." And there was the beat, the little gap, the cold country. And Halvorsen said, "Do it again, Bell. That is an order." And Bell looked at the captain, and something moved behind his eyes. Something old and patient, and not Bell at all, there for just a second, and then gone, and he breathed again. And this time we all watched for it, all of us, and the air in front of his face did not stir. Nothing. No cloud. In a room cold enough to fog every other breath, At that table, my friend breathed out a second time, and the air did not move at all, and Sella said, still quiet, still with her hands flat on the table, "He can do it once. He can force it once. Whatever is in him, it learned that we look for the fog. It learned it off us this week, watching us watch him, and it can push a little air out and warm it just enough one time for show. But it cannot keep it up. It does not have the furnace for it. It is not warm inside. Watch his chest, not the fog. Watch him breathe. He is not breathing. He is performing breathing. There is no rhythm to it. A living man breathes all the time without thinking, and Bell has not taken an unforced breath since he sat down. I have been watching. He only breathes when we ask." And the thing wearing my friend stopped smiling, because there was no more point to the smile, and it looked around the table at all of us with Bell's eyes, and it was not a beat too late anymore. It did not need to be, and it said, in Bell's voice, "Easy and pleasant and terrible, so cold in here. You keep it so cold." And it turned its face to the reactor bulkhead, toward the warm, the way a flower turns to the sun, and I understood that it had been waiting, that it had been patient, that it had learned our test and beaten our test and would have gone on beating it, and that Sella, who kept her nose in paper books and took a core temperature 3 times and watched a man's chest instead of his face, was the only reason we caught it at all. And I understood in the same breath that catching it was not the end of anything. It was the start of the worst night of my life, and it was not even the worst one coming. Nobody moved for what felt like a year and was probably 3 seconds. The thing that had been Bell sat at our table with its face turned toward the warm bulkhead, and the 6 of us who were still ourselves sat frozen around it, and the only sound was the ship ticking in the cold and the faint hum of my heat plant working its heart out to warm a ship that would not get warm. Then Halverson stood up, slow, the way you stand up when a wrong move might set something off, and she said, in the flattest, kindest, most terrible voice I ever heard her use, "Bell, Tomas, if there is any of you still in there, I am sorry, and I want you to know we tried, and I want you to know your girl is going to hear that you did everything right, because you did. You did everything right. It was the glove. It was not your fault." The thing turned Bell's face away from the wall and looked at her, and it wore an expression that was almost grief, almost a clever copy of grief made by something that had watched Bell grieve and filed it away. And it said, "He is not in here." It said it gently. "There is no one in here but me. He was warm, and now he is not. It is not sad. You think it is sad. It is only cold, and then it is not cold, and that is better." And it looked around the table at all of us, and it said, "You are all so warm. I can feel you from here." And it smiled Bell's smile. Cutter moved first. I think Cutter had been Bell's friend longer than any of us, 20 years of outside work on a dozen ships, and I think it was more than he could hold. Hearing that thing use Bell's mouth to say Bell was gone, and Cutter came up out of his chair fast for a big man and got a hand around the thing's arm to haul it up, and he was saying its name, Bell's name, over and over. "Get up, Bell. Come on. Get up, you son of a bitch." And Halverson was shouting, "No. Do not touch it. Do not let it touch you." And it was already too late. It was always already too late. That was the whole shape of it. The thing let Cutter pull it up. It did not resist. And as it came up out of the chair, it reached out with Bell's frostbitten hand, the one with the frostbite that would not heal, and it took Cutter's face in that hand, gentle, almost tender, the way you might cup a friend's cheek. And it held Cutter's face, and it looked into Cutter's eyes, and Cutter went rigid, and Cutter screamed. I have heard men scream. Outside work is dangerous work, and I have heard men scream from broken bones and burns and worse. I never heard a sound like the one Cutter made. It was not pain, or it was not only pain. It was the sound of a man feeling the cold come into him, feeling it start at his face where the hand held him and run down into him, into his warm places, and knowing what it was, because he had heard the log same as the rest of us. He knew exactly what was happening to him, and he could not stop it, and he could feel it start. And he screamed, and the thing held his face, and drank the warmth out of him through its hand, and looked into his eyes the whole time with Belle's calm and grieving face. Then everything happened at once, the way it always does when the slow part ends. Okafor and I got the thing off Cutter. I do not remember deciding to. I remember my hands on Belle's shoulders, on the shoulders of the thing wearing Belle. And it was so cold under my hands, even through his shirt, that it burned, the same burn as the conduit behind the panel. The burn of deep cold. And I remember thinking, through the burn, do not let it touch your skin. Whatever you do, keep it off your skin. And I kept my grip on his shirt, and I hauled, and Okafor hauled, and the thing let go of Cutter's face, and Cutter went down on the deck making a sound. Now that was not a scream, a low broken moaning. His hands over his own face, where the frostbite was already blooming white across his cheek in the shape of Belle's fingers. Marchetti was screaming. Sella was down on the deck next to Cutter with her medical kit open, doing what she could, which was nothing. There is nothing you do for it. But she did not know that yet in her hands, even though she knew it in her head. Her hands did not believe it yet. Halvorsen had the fire suppression gear off the wardroom bulkhead, the little emergency rig every compartment carries, and she was not aiming the foam. She had cracked the nozzle open on the other setting, the purge setting, the one that dumps the compartment's whole reserve of hot pressurized gas, and she pointed it at the thing, and she opened it up, and a jet of superheated gas hit the thing, wearing Belle full in the chest, and it screamed. For the first time it screamed, and it was not Belle's voice. Whatever came out of it then was not any human voice. It was a sound like ice cracking across a whole lake at once, a long splitting shriek, and the thing flinched back from the heat. It flinched. It curled away from the hot gas the way you curl away from a flame, and I understood, we all understood in the same instant, that it could be hurt, that the one thing on our ship it was afraid of was the one thing it had been drinking. That heat was not just its food. Heat was its enemy. Too much of it too fast, and it could not stand it. Halvorsen kept the jet on it and said, hard and fast, the lock, get it to the lock, the sample lock, move. And Okafor and I moved. We walked it backward out of the wardroom, with Halvorsen driving it ahead of us, with the hot gas, the thing shrieking and flinching and giving ground. Cold coming off it in waves so hard. The frost grew on the deck under its feet as it went, and we got it down the number 2 passage past the warm reactor bulkhead where it tried to stop, tried to press itself against the warmth, and Halvorsen burned it off the wall with the jet, and we kept it moving, and we got it to the outer sample lock, the sealed cold locker at the very skin of the ship, where Okafor's core sample sat in its containment, and we put it inside and we sealed the inner door. And then Halvorsen, without a word, without a beat of hesitation, hit the emergency vent on the outer lock, and the outer door blew, and the sample lock opened to the vacuum. And the thing that had been my friend Tomas Bell was blown out into the dark, toward the world it came from, out into the cold it loved. And the outer door cycled shut again, and it was gone. We stood in the passage, breathing hard, the 4 of us who had walked it down, Halvorsen and Okafor, and me and Marchetti, who had followed screaming and gone silent. And I remember hoping in that moment that the vacuum in the vent had killed it, that the thing was dead out there in the black. And I remember Halvorsen looking at the sealed lock with a face that had no hope in it at all, and I found out later she was right to have none, but that is later. We went back for Cutter. Sella had him sitting up against the wardroom bulkhead. The frostbite across his face had stopped spreading fast, and gone that same waxy pale as Belle's frostbite, and Cutter was conscious, and he was quiet, and that was the worst thing, because Cutter conscious and quiet was wrong, the way Belle quiet had been wrong, and we all knew what it meant, and none of us could say it, least of all Cutter, who knew better than any of us, because it was happening inside his own body. He knew. That is the thing I cannot get past, even now. Belle never knew. The thing took Belle so fast and so quiet that I do not think Belle ever understood what happened to him. One moment he was warm and telling a joke, and the next there was no more Belle. But Cutter knew. Cutter sat against the bulkhead with the mark of it on his face, and he felt it start. He felt the cold come into his warm places, the same way we had all heard the man Rourke described on the log. And Cutter had hours, maybe a day, to sit inside his own body and feel himself being put out like a lamp, slow, from the inside, and know exactly what was coming and not be able to stop it. He asked us to space him. He asked while he could still ask, while it was still him asking, and that is the bravest and most terrible thing I have ever heard a person do. He sat against the bulkhead with his old scarred hands hanging between his knees, and he looked at Halverson and he said, "When it gets to where I answer you a beat too late, when you hold up the glass and I do not fog it, do not wait. Do not try to fix me. There is no fixing it. You heard the man. Put me out the lock, same as Bell, and do it before I turn. Do it while there is still enough of me left to want it done." And Halverson crouched down in front of him and took his scarred hands in hers, warm to cold, and she said, "I hear you, Cutter, and I will not let you become that. I promise you." And Cutter nodded and closed his eyes, and we let him rest, and Sella sat with him, and the ship got colder around all of us. And outside, in the dark, the world we had come to find sat there filling the sky with nothing, patient as it had been for a billion years, and I understood that it was not in a hurry, that it had never once in all of time been in a hurry, and that we were Cutter turned before morning. There was no morning out there, only the ship's clock telling us it was a new day, but I will call it morning because that is what my body wanted it to be. He turned in the back half of the night, and Halverson kept her promise. I was not in the compartment when it happened, and Halverson never told any of us the details, and I never asked. What I know is that Sella sat with Cutter through the night, doing the glass test every hour, holding up a polished steel tray from the galley in front of his face because it fogged clean and you could see the fog against the metal, and for a while he fogged it, fainter each time. And Cutter stared at his own breath fading against the tray and did not say anything. And then near the end of the night he fogged it once for show, one forced cloud, the way Bell had. And Sella said afterward that she knew then, and she said he knew she knew, and he looked at her and said, "Get the captain," and he said it a beat too late, and those were the last words. Cutter said that we're Cutter, get the captain, and Halverson came, and Halverson kept her promise, and in the morning there were 5 of us. I found Halverson alone in the number 2 passage after sitting on Bell's upturned crate against the warm reactor bulkhead, in the one warm spot left on the whole ship, and she was not warming her hands. She was just sitting. I sat down next to her on the deck, and neither of us said anything for a long time, and then she said, "I have put down 40 years, and I never once had to do that." And I said, "You did what he asked." And she said, "I know. That is not the same as it being all right, and it never will be, and I do not want it to be. A day it feels all right is a day I have become something I do not want to be." And she got up and went back to being the captain, because we had 4 people left besides her and a ship that was freezing and a thing outside in the dark, and being the captain does not stop for grief. It only waits for it. The thing outside was not dead. We found that out that same morning, and it was Marchetti who found it, because Marchetti was on the flight deck where she always was, with her light on, and she saw it on the hull camera. The vent had blown Bell's body out toward the dark world, and I had let myself hope that it was tumbling away into the black to freeze solid and be lost, and it was not. It had not gone away. It was on our hull. The hull camera showed it, a shape spread flat against the plating of the ambit down near the outer sample lock, a human shape in a shirt gone stiff with frost, spread out flat with its arms and legs splayed wide, pressed against the skin of our ship, the way a moth presses against a lit window, and it was not moving, and it did not need to move, because I understood what it was doing the moment I saw it, and so did everyone else. It was warming itself on us. The ambit was the only warm thing in 100 million kilometers, a little spark of heat in the endless cold, and the thing had ridden the vent out onto our hull and spread itself flat against the warmth of us, and it was drinking through the plating, through the skin of the ship, the same way it had drunk through Bell's palm on the reactor bulkhead, and it would sit there flat against us, drinking our heat out through the hull for as long as it took, patient, in no hurry, because it had all the time there ever was, and we did not. That is why the ship would not warm up. Not the only reason, but a reason. Okafor ran the numbers. The heat loss through the section of hull the thing was covering, and it was enormous, far more than a frozen body should carry, and he got excited in that way of his that I had stopped being able to stand, and he started talking about how the thing must be a superconductor of heat, a perfect thermal sink, how it violated everything, how the physics of it would rewrite, and Halvorsen said, Okafor, and he stopped, but he did not stop for long. He never stopped for long, and I should have seen it. The not stopping, I should have understood what it meant that Okafor could look at the frozen corpse of a crewmate spread against our hull drinking us dry and feel wonder instead of horror. I put it down to Okafor being Okafor. It was not Okafor being Okafor. It was the cold already in him, already changing what he could feel, turning down the part of him that should have been afraid, because the cold is not afraid. The cold does not need to be, and the more of him it took, the less of him was left to be afraid with. We learned to hurt it, and that bought us time, and time was the only thing worth buying. Heat drove it back. We had proven that in the wardroom with the purge jet, and now Marchetti proved it again from the flight deck using the ship herself. She fired the attitude thrusters on the side where the thing clung, not to move the ship, there was nothing to move toward, but to wash that stretch of hull with the hot exhaust. And on the camera we watched the thing curl and flinch and lose its grip and peel away from the plating, driven off by the heat, tumbling back out into the dark, and we all cheered, actually cheered, the five of us, the first good sound in days. And then it stopped tumbling. Out there in the black with nothing to push against, it stopped its tumble somehow, spread its arms and legs, and it came back. It could not swim, there is nothing to swim in, but it oriented itself toward the only warm thing in the universe, and it drifted back to us across the dark, slow, patient, and it settled flat against the hull again a little further from the thruster, and it started drinking again. We could drive it off. We could not make it leave. It had nowhere to go and nothing to want except us, and it would keep coming back to the warm as long as there was warm. And the terrible arithmetic of it was that every time we fired the thrusters to drive it off, we burned fuel and made heat and spent the very thing it had come to take. We were feeding it by fighting it. Everything we did to survive made us a brighter, warmer, more desperate spark in the dark, and it wanted nothing in all the world but that. Halvorsen made the call that afternoon, if it was afternoon. She gathered the five of us, Marchetti and Sella and Okafor and me, in the number 2 passage by the warm reactor bulkhead, because it was the only place left where a person could stand without shaking. 40 on the panels now, through the rest of the ship, and dropping frost creeping up the walls of the far compartments, the way it had grown on the Osprey. Our home turning into the dead white ship a kilometer off our nose, one compartment at a time. And Halvorsen said, "We are not going to win a waiting game against a thing that has been waiting since before the sun. So we are not going to wait. We are going home." It was not that simple, and she knew it was not, and she laid it out flat the way she laid everything out. The ambit could not just turn and burn for home, not with the thing on the hull and the ship freezing, and no way to know if the drive would even light clean in the cold. But we had the survey boat, the little short-range craft sitting warm and sealed in the boat bay, its own small drive, its own small reactor, enough to make the inner system if we nursed it, if we were careful, if we did not mind spending months in a can the size of a closet. It could take 4. It was built for a survey party of 4 and their gear, and there were 5 of us, and Halvorsen said that number out loud and let it sit there, 4 seats and 5 people, and nobody said anything, because there was nothing to say to it yet, and she moved on, because that was the kind of problem you did not solve early, you solved it at the end, when the shape of things had made the choice for you, and I think Halvorsen already knew that day how the arithmetic was going to come out and who was going to make it come out that way. And she said nothing about it, and neither did I, because I did not let myself understand it yet. The plan was this: prep the boat, strip the ambit of everything the boat would need for a long, slow crawl home: food, water, spare air, power cells, all of it warm out of the reactor spaces before the cold took them. Get everyone into the boat, and then, at the last, do the one thing we knew would hurt the thing badly enough to matter, the one big heat we had left. We would take the ambit's main reactor past its limits on purpose, dump its whole heart of heat into the ship all at once, cook the hull, cook the thing clinging to it, and in the light and the heat of the ambit burning her own core, we would launch the little boat out the far side and run for home, 5 months of dark ahead of us, and the fire of our own ship dying behind us. It was a good plan. Halverson made good plans. And it had one soft place in it, one place where it depended on a person doing a thing by hand at the last second and not getting out, because you cannot overload a reactor that far on the timer and trust the timer. Not a reactor gone cold and strange. Someone had to be at the plant to push it over and hold it over, and that someone was not getting to the boat after. We did not talk about that part. Halverson laid the whole plan out and left that part as a shape under a sheet, and everyone in that cold passage saw the shape, and nobody lifted the sheet, and we went to work. We had 2 days of work to do, and we did not have 2 days. We had until the cold reached the reactor spaces, until the last warm place on the ambit went cold, and the way the temperature was falling, that was going to be sooner than 2 days, and there were 5 of us to do it, except that one of us was not one of us anymore, and had not been for a while, and was only waiting, warm and patient and drinking, for the moment when being one of us stopped being useful. We worked in pairs, because Halverson ordered it. No one alone anywhere on the ship, ever, not to a cold compartment, for a power cell, not to the head, nowhere. 2 people, always, so that each of us always had a witness, always had somebody to hold up the steel tray and watch us fog it. It was a good order, and we mostly kept it, and the one time we did not keep it was the time it cost us, which is how these things go. It is never the rule that fails you. It is the one time you set the rule down. We ran the glass test every hour on the hour, all 5 of us, in the number 2 passage, where it was warm enough to trust the fog. And I have to set down what that is like, because it became the shape of my life for those 2 days, and it is the thing I still do, alone, in the dark, all these months later. You crowd into a warm passage with the people you have left. You hold up a piece of polished steel, and one by one you breathe on it, and you watch the little bloom of fog appear on the metal and fade, and you watch the others watch you, and you feel every single time the animal terror that this will be the time your own breath does not show, that you will breathe and the metal will stay clear, and you will see it in their faces before you feel it in yourself, that you have been gone for hours and did not know, and then your breath fogs the steel, and you are still you for one more hour, and the relief is so total and so physical that people wept. We all wept at one time or another, breathing on a galley tray in a freezing passage, weeping with relief at the sight of our own breath. That is what the thing did to us. Before it ever killed one more of us, it made us grateful, hour after hour, for the simple animal fact of breathing, and there is a cruelty in that I have never gotten to the bottom of. I checked myself between the checks. That is a thing I have never told anyone, and am only telling now because there is no one left for it to matter to. The hourly tests in the passage was not enough for me, once the fear got its hooks in, and in my bunk, in the dark of the off hours, I would lie there and hold my own 2 hands up in front of my face and press them together and try to feel my own warmth in them, and I could never be sure. A person cannot feel the temperature of their own hands. Your hands are always exactly as warm as you are. That is the trap of it. There is no part of your own body cold enough to check the rest against. So I took to carrying a bit of steel of my own, a spoon from the galley, and keeping it against the cold outer bulkhead by my bunk so it stayed cold, and in the dark I would take that cold spoon and breathe on it. Alone, no witness. Just me and a cold spoon in a dark bunk, checking, and it would fog, and I would lie there holding a foggy spoon against my chest like a child holding a toy, and only then could I sleep. Some nights. A little. I did not tell the others. I think now that all of us were doing some private version of it. All 5. Each of us alone in the dark with our own secret spoon, our own cold scrap of steel. None of us saying so, because saying so would mean admitting how far down the fear had gotten, and we needed each other to believe we were the steady ones. That is another thing the thing did to us, quieter than the killing, and maybe worse. It did not only turn us against each other, it turned each of us, alone, in the dark, against ourselves. Okafor passed every test. He would step up and breathe on the steel, and a fog would show, and he would step back, and Sella watched him the way she had watched Belle, watched his chest and not the fog, and she told me quietly, on the second day, that she was not sure. She said, "He fogs it, but I cannot swear he breathes between tests, and I cannot swear he does not. He is so still now, and he was always a still man. That is the trouble. Belle moved all the time, so the stillness showed. Okafor was always still, and I cannot tell the difference between a still man and a man who has stopped. And I am scared, Doyle. I am scared I am going to call it wrong on him one way or the other, and either way, somebody dies. And I did not have anything for her. I had stopped having things for her. I just held up the tray and watched her fog it, my breath and hers both showing. 2 warm people in a freezing passage, and I held on to that the way I held on to everything by then, which is to say barely, with cold hands. Okafor spent his off hours near the outer sample lock. I knew it because I do rounds. It is bones deep in me. Even at the end of the world I did my rounds, and on my rounds I would find Okafor down at the aft end of the ship near the vented lock, where the cold was worst, where a person had no reason to be, standing in the frost in the dark with his hand flat against the inner door of the lock, the door with the frozen thing on the far side of it drinking through the hull. And when I asked him what he was doing, he would turn around a beat too late and say he was taking readings, and he would show me a slate with readings on it, and the readings were real, and I could not prove anything. And I told myself Okafor was Okafor, a man who would take readings on his own death, and I walked on, and I did not tell Halverson, because what would I have said? He stands near the cold. So do half the frightened things a person does. I did not tell her, and that is on me. That is one more small choice I take out and look at, because if I had told her we might have kept a witness on Okafor, and if we had kept a witness on Okafor, then Marchetti would not have gone with him alone to the aft power bay, and if Marchetti had not gone with him alone, then, it does not end, then. It is the longest word I know. Here is how we lost Marchetti, as near as I could put it together after, because I was not there, none of us were there, that was the whole problem. We needed the aft power cells, the big ones in the aft bay for the boat, and the aft bay was cold now, cold enough that you needed a suit, and it was a 2-person job to pull the cells and pass them forward. Halverson assigned it. And in the ordinary run of things, it would have been me and one other, but I was elbow deep in the boat's reclaimer at that hour with Sella, and Halverson was at the reactor prepping the end game, and that left Okafor and Marchetti, and Halverson sent them together, 2 people, per the rule, and it was the right call with the wrong 2 people, and there was no way for her to know. Marchetti did not want to go. She was scared of the aft bay, scared of the cold and the dark of it, scared the way she was always scared, but worse now, and she said it to me on her way past the boat bay, half joking, "Come with me instead of Okafor, you are better company," and I said, "I have got to finish this reclaimer, take Okafor, you will be fine, 2 of you, keep the tray on each other." And she laughed and said, "Always the tray," and she went aft with Okafor and her light in her hand, her little hand torch that she carried everywhere now, because she could not stand the dark. And that is the last I saw of Gia Marchetti while she was Gia Marchetti, walking aft into the cold with a light in her hand, telling me I was better company, laughing. We heard it on the channel. Sella and I, in the boat bay, heard it come over the suit channel, because they had their suits on for the cold, and their suits were open on the common channel, and what we heard was Marchetti's voice saying, "Okafor, breathe on the tray." and a pause, and Marchetti sang it again, sharper. Okafor, hold still and breathe on the tray. And then Okafor's voice, flat and pleasant and slow, saying, of course, and then nothing. No struggle on the channel, no scream. Just Marchetti saying his name once more, small, not a shout, almost a question, Okafor. And then the channel had the particular quality of quiet that a channel has when someone is still there but not talking. An open mic over a cold room. And I knew that quiet, we all knew that quiet, we had heard a whole ship's worth of it in the last transmissions of the Osprey. And Sella and I were already moving, already running aft, but there is no running fast on a ship. The passages are narrow and the hatches are small, and by the time we got to the aft bay it had been 2 minutes, and 2 minutes was forever. 2 minutes was all the time in the world. The aft bay was dark. Marchetti's light was on the deck, still on, throwing a hard circle of light up the far wall, and by its edge light we saw them. Okafor was standing too still by the power cell rack with his hands at his sides. And Marchetti was on the deck, on her back, her helmet off in a compartment cold enough to kill, and she was breathing. I could see her chest moving. She was alive, and I felt a surge of relief that lasted exactly as long as it took me to see that the air above her face, in the hard cold of that bay, in air cold enough to fog a breath thick as smoke, was perfectly still. She was breathing, her chest was moving, and nothing was coming out. She lay on the deck of the aft bay, with her helmet off, and her chest rising and falling, performing breath, the way a thing performs breath when it has just learned the shape of it from the inside, and her eyes were open and they found me, and they were Marchetti's eyes, they were still the color of Marchetti's eyes, and the thing behind them looked out at me through Gia Marchetti's open eyes, and it smiled with her mouth, and it said, in her voice, better company. You should have come instead of Okafor. I do not remember getting out of the aft bay. Sella says, I got us both out, that I grabbed her and pulled her back through the hatch and dogged it shut behind us, and I believe her, but I do not remember it. The next thing I have is the two of us in the number 2 passage, with our backs against the warm reactor bulkhead, breathing hard, our breath fogging thick in front of our faces, and Halverson coming down the passage at a dead run because she had heard it too, and me trying to tell her, and not being able to, and Sella telling her, Okafor is gone. Okafor was gone before today. He took Marchetti in the aft bay. They are both. And Sella could not finish it either, and she did not have to. Halvorson's face had already closed like a door. 2 of them now, inside the ship. Okafor and Marchetti, wearing the faces of our survey officer and our pilot, cold and patient and no longer bothering to hide it, moving through the freezing dark of the aft third of the ambit, between us and half the gear we still needed, between us and the boat if they got ahead of us. And out on the hull, the third one, Bell, spread flat and drinking, and the whole ship going cold around the last 3 warm bodies aboard. Halvorsen and Sella and me, backed up against the last warm wall on a ship 100 million kilometers from another living soul. And Halvorsen, God keep her, Halvorsen did not fall apart. Halvorsen looked at the 2 of us and she said, all right, then we move up the plan. We go tonight. And she started giving orders, fast and clear and calm, and her orders were the only warm thing left on that ship, and we followed them, because there was nothing else in the whole cold universe to follow. The boat was ready. That was the one mercy in it, that Sella and I had finished the boat. The reclaimer was in and running. The stores were aboard. The little craft sat warm and sealed in the boat bay, with its own small reactor ticking over. The one warm room left on the ambit that the cold had not gotten into yet. All we had to do was get to it. 3 of us, from the number 2 passage amidships to the boat bay forward, along maybe 60 meters of the ship, and somewhere in those 60 meters, in the freezing dark, were 2 things wearing the faces of our friends, and they were faster than us, and they did not get tired, and they wanted the warm of us more than we wanted anything at all. Halvorsen led. She had the purge rig off the wardroom bulkhead, the hot gas that hurt them, and she carried a plasma torch besides one of the outside tools, cranked up past spec so it threw a jet of blue fire the length of your arm. And Scylla and I came behind her, and we carried torches too, the ordinary kind, light, because there were no lights on in the forward third anymore. The cold had killed them, and we went up the passage into the dark of our own ship with fire in our hands. They came at us at the galley. Of course it was the galley. The galley was warmish still, close to the reactor runs, and they had been waiting in the warm the way they always waited in the warm. Okafor came first, out of the dark of the galley hatch, moving wrong, moving too smooth and too fast, no hitch in it, no human hesitation. And Halvorsen met him with the plasma torch full in the face, and he made that lake ice shriek and folded away from the fire. And behind him came Marchetti, small and fast. Marchetti had always been fast, and she went low and passed the torch, and she got to Scylla. I was right there. I want that known. I was an arm's length from Scylla when the Marchetti thing got to her, and I swung my torch at it, and it did not care about my little torch. It barely felt it, and it took Scylla by the wrist, bare skin. Scylla had taken her glove off to work the boat's reclaimer and never put it back on, one bare hand, and the Marchetti thing took her by that bare wrist, and Scylla looked at me. She had time to look at me. She had time, in the half-second before the cold went up her arm and into her, to look right at me with her clever, frightened eyes, and she did not scream. Scylla, she did not scream. She said, "Go." And then her face changed. Not because the thing had her yet, but because she felt it start. She felt the cold come into her wrist. And she knew the whole shape of it better than any of us because she was the one who had worked it out. And she used the last clean second she had, the last second that was Scylla, to shove me, hard, both hands flat on my chest, back toward Halvorsen in the boat, and she said it again, "Go, Doyle." And it was the last word she said to me while she was herself, and then the cold had her, and I went. I hate that I went. I have to say that. Scylla told me to go twice, and I went, and it was the right thing. It was the only thing. There was nothing I could have done except die there holding on to her while she turned, and I knew that. And I know it now. And I hate that I went. And both of those are true, and they do not cancel out. They just both sit there in me, forever, side by side. Halvorsen burned a path to the boat bay with the plasma torch. The two things, three now. Scylla turning fast behind us, they came after us up the passage, and Halvorsen kept them back with the fire, walking backward, driving the blue jet at anything that came into the light. And they hated the fire, they gave ground to the fire, but they did not stop, they never stopped. They just waited past the edge of the light for the fire to run out, patient, cold. And we backed into the boat bay, and I got the bay hatch dogged shut behind us, and Halvorsen leaned against it, breathing hard, her breath fogging thick, and I looked at her breath. I could not help it, I had to know, and it fogged, thick and white and real. She was still her, and I loved her for it. I loved that cloud of breath more than I have ever loved almost anything. And then there was the arithmetic. The boat was ready, and the boat had 4 seats, and there were 2 of us, and that should have been the mercy of it. 2 of us and 4 seats, more than enough, except that the plan needed a hand at the reactor. The whole plan, the fire that would cook the thing off the hull and cover our launch, needed someone at the plant to push the core over and hold it over while the boat got clear. And you could not do that and then get to the boat. The boat launched from forward, and the reactor was aft through 60 meters of passage that now had 3 cold things in it. And there was no timer you could trust on a reactor gone strange in the cold. Someone had to stay. We both knew it. We had known it since Halvorsen laid the plan out in the passage 2 days before and left it as a shape under a sheet, and now the sheet was off, and the shape was a person, and the person was going to be one of us. I said I would do it. I want that known too. I said, I will hold the reactor, you take the boat, and I meant it. I would have done it. I think I would have done it. And Halvorsen looked at me and she said no. And she said it the way she said things, once. And then she told me why, and it was not a kind lie to make it easier. It was the truth, which was worse. She said, "You have a girl at home. I do not. I have 40 years of ships and a pension I will never spend, and you have a 9-year-old on Ceres who has a stack of little videos coming to her that she does not know about yet. And one of us is going to hold this reactor, and the other one's going to go put those videos in that child's hands. And it is not going to be me who goes, Doyle, because I could not live with it. I would get home and I would know I took a father off a child to save an old woman, and that is a thing I will not do. That is the one thing in all of this I get to choose, so I am choosing it. And you are going to let me, because it is the last order I am ever going to give you, and you are going to follow it like you followed all the rest." I did not have anything. There was nothing to have. She was right, and it was monstrous that she was right, and there was no way around it. And I stood in the warm boat bay with the cold pressing at the hatch, and the last of my crew telling me she was going to die so my daughter could have her father. And I did the only thing there was to do, which was, I said, "Yes, Captain." And she nodded, once, like it was any other order, and she went to the reactor console we had rigged in the corner of the boat bay. The remote start we had built so the boat's occupants could trigger the overload from safety, except now it was Halvorsen who would trigger it by hand from here and then run aft to hold it. Because the remote could start the overload, but the cold, strange core needed a hand on it to keep it climbing. That was the soft place in the plan. That was always the soft place, a person, holding on. And then, at the last, with my hand on the boat's hatch, I turned around to look at her one more time, and the cold thing that lives in me now, the small, careful animal thing the whole voyage had put there, it made me do the test. I did not want to. She had just fogged the glass at the bay hatch not 5 minutes before, thick and real. I had seen it. But 5 minutes is 5 minutes, and I had learned what 5 minutes can do, and I stood there with my hand on the hatch, and I could not stop myself, and I said, "Captain, breathe for me. One more time, please." And Halvorsen understood. She did not take it as an insult. She turned around from the console, and she looked at me across the warm boat bay, and there was something in her face I have not been able to name in all the months since, something tired and gentle and far away. And she opened her mouth and she breathed out, slow, toward me. So I could see, and I could not tell. I want to be exact about this, because it is the thing I have carried furthest, and it is the thing that will not close. The boat bay was the last warm room on the ship. It was warm. And in a warm room a breath does not fog, or it fogs so faint you cannot be sure. That is not the thing malfunctioning. That is just physics. That is just a warm room. And I had chosen the one warm room on the whole cold ship to ask her to prove she was alive, and the room gave me nothing back. She breathed out toward me, and the warm air of the boat bay took her breath and gave me no cloud, no clear white proof. Maybe the faintest ghost of something, and maybe nothing at all. Maybe just my eyes making a shape out of the wanting, and I stood there staring at the air in front of my captain's face, and I could not tell if she was Halvorsen or if she was the thing wearing Halvorsen, telling me exactly what a father needs to hear, sending me off to my daughter with a warm lie, keeping me calm and moving and away from the fire while it drank the ship dry behind me. And Halvorsen saw me, not being able to tell. She saw it in my face, and she smiled a little, that same faraway smile, and she said, "Get home to your girl, Doyle." And I do not know, I will never know, whether that was the kindest thing a good captain ever said to me, or the cruelest thing a cold thing ever said to anyone, whether those were Dana Halvorsen's own true last words to a man she was dying to save, or whether they were the perfect warm bait of a thing that had learned, off 2 days of watching me weep with relief at my own breath, exactly what to say to make me climb into that boat and go. And I got into the boat and I went. The boat launched clean. That much the plan gave me. The bay doors ran on their own power, separate from the ship. We had made sure of that. and they opened onto the dark, and the little craft's drive lit on the first try, warm and willing, and I went out the forward face of the ambit and away, and behind me my ship, my home for 3 months and change, my dead crew's tomb, fell away into the black with the dark world hanging over it like a held breath. I watched it go on the aft camera. I did not want to, and I could not stop. I watched the ambit shrink, and I watched the dark shape spread flat against her hull down near the aft lock. Bell, still drinking. And I watched the whole ship dwindle toward the greater dark of the Marrow beyond it, and I watched for the flare. There was only the one shape on the hull. I looked for a second one, for Cutter, and there was not one, and it took me a moment to understand why, and then I did. Bell had gone out the sample lock at the hull in all that noise and confusion, vented hard against the plating with nowhere to go, and he had caught and held. Cutter was different. By the time it was Cutter, we knew what venting one of them at the hull got you, and Halverson had not made that mistake twice. She had put Cutter out the aft lock later, deliberate, and blown him clear, with a hard push of the maneuvering jets, out and away toward the dark, so that whatever was wearing him could not take hold on the skin of the ship the way Bell had. So Cutter was out there somewhere in the black, drifting, cold and patient, and going nowhere I would ever have to look at again, and there was only Bell on the hull, and God help me, I was glad it was Bell, because glad was the only warm thing I had left, and I took it where I could get it. That was the deal. That was the whole shape of the plan, and of Halverson's promise, and of the last order she ever gave. She was going to hold the reactor over and dump the ambit's whole heart of heat into the hull all at once, and cook that thing off our skin, and the ship was going to flare bright, a little sun blooming in the dark for a few seconds before it died, and that flare was going to mean that Dana Halverson had been herself all the way to the end, that she had kept her promise, that the last order and the last words and the last faraway smile had all been hers and not the thing's, because the thing would never light that fire. The thing feared that fire more than anything in the universe. A taken Halverson would have let the ship go cold and dark and quiet and would never ever have blown the core. So I watched for the flare. I watched the aft camera until my eyes burned, the little shape of the ambit getting smaller against the black, and I waited for the light that would tell me who I had left behind. It did not come, or it came so faint and so far that I could not swear to it. There was a moment, maybe a minute after launch, maybe two, when the aft camera caught something, a brightening, a smear of light where the ambit had been, there and gone. So brief and so small at that distance that it could have been the flare, the core going over, the fire blooming, or it could have been the boat's own drive throwing light back off some debris, or it could have been nothing at all, my eyes making a shape out of the wanting the way they had made a shape out of Halverson's breath in the warm bay. And then the ambit was too small and too far, just a fleck, and then it was gone into the dark near the Marrow, and there was no more camera to watch, and I never knew. I have run that minute of footage 1,000 times since. I have it saved. I have brightened it and slowed it and studied it frame by frozen frame, and it does not resolve. It will not resolve. It is a smear of maybe light at the edge of a dark that ate my whole life, and every time I watch it I decide something different. Some watches it is the flare, clean and bright, and Halvorsen was herself, and she kept her promise, and the last thing she ever did was save a father for his child, and I can breathe. In some watches it is nothing, and there was no fire, and the ship went cold and dark and quiet with the thing wearing my captain standing at a reactor it would never light, watching the boat carry off the last warm meal in 100 million kilometers. Patient, in no hurry, because it has the boat's heading, and it has all the time there ever was. I do not get to choose which watch is true. That is the thing about the glass. You have to be there, in the cold, watching the breath, or you never know, and I was not there. I was in the boat. I was going home to my girl. That was the deal. The Marrow did not shrink. That is the first thing I noticed once the ambit was gone and there was nothing to do but fly. And it took me a while to notice it. because a person does not expect to have to check whether a planet is getting smaller behind them. You assume it is. You are flying away from it at the best speed a survey boat can make. But I am a careful man. It is the one thing I have always been. And on the second day out, I put the Marrow on the aft camera to see how far I had come, and I measured it, the black circle against the stars. And I wrote the number down. And on the third day, I measured it again, and it had shrunk, but not as much as it should have. Not nearly as much. I was making good speed. The Marrow should have been falling away behind me fast, and it was falling away slow. So slow, and I told myself the boat's ranging was off. The little craft's instruments were not the ambits. Of course they were not as precise. And I believed that for about a day, and then I stopped believing it, and I have not measured the Marrow since, because I do not want to know, because the only two answers are that my instruments are wrong, or that the Marrow is closer than a world I am flying away from ought to be, and I cannot do anything about either one. And there are some questions you stop asking, not because you have answered them, but because the answer can only hurt. I set up my life in the boat. You have to. 5 months is a long time in a can the size of a closet, and the only way through a long time is a small routine done the same way every day, so I made one. I checked the reclaimer. I checked the drive. I checked the stores. I ate. I slept. Badly, in thin dreams I could not hold on to. And I did the two things that mattered, the two things that were the whole point of me still being alive, and I did them every single day without fail, and they were opposite things, and I did them both, and I think doing both of them at once is what has kept me a person, if I am still a person. The first thing was the recordings. I kept making them for Nell. I had 100 and some already, from the ambit, from before, the whole stack of her father talking to a camera in a cold room, and I kept adding to them, one every ship's night, out here in the boat, alone. I do not tell her what happened. I am not going to be the man who tells a 9-year-old about the Marrow. I tell her about the stars, how thick they are out here, how you can see the whole depth of the sky. I tell her I am coming home. I tell her about the place I am going to buy us, the one with real air and a window that looks at something green. I tell her I love her, every night, at the end, and I hold up my hand to the camera the way I used to hold it up to her when she was small, palm out, and she would put her small palm up against the screen on the other end, and we would hold our hands up to each other across all that dark. I still do it. I hold my palm up to the camera. There is no one on the other end yet. There will be when I get home, when I put the stack in her hands and she watches her old man miss her in order. I hold my palm up to the empty camera and I say, "Good night, Nell, and I love you," and I stop the recording, and that is the first thing. The second thing is the glass. Every day, more than once a day, I hold up a piece of polished steel in front of my own face, and I breathe on it, and I watch for the fog. I do it the way Sella taught us, right, without wanting the answer, and I watch my own breath bloom on the metal and fade, and every single time, in the half second before it shows, I feel the whole cold weight of everything that happened come down on me at once, because this is the time, this is going to be the time it does not show, this is going to be the time I find out I have been gone for hours and did not know that whatever rode the boat out of that ship rode it out inside me, that I had been recording videos for my daughter with a mouth that does not breathe, and then my breath fogs the steel, and I am still me for one more day, and I put the steel down with my hand shaking, and I go check the reclaimer, and that is my life now, and I will do it every day until I am home, or until the day the steel stays clear, and I do not let myself think too hard about which of those is going to come first, because I am a careful man, and a careful man does not measure the Marrow, and a careful man does not think too hard about the day the steel stays clear. A careful man just breathes on the steel and checks the reclaimer and holds his palm up to the empty camera and says goodnight to a girl who cannot hear him, yet one more day, one more day, one more day. The silence of the boat is a thing I was not ready for, and I had thought I was ready for a lot. On the ambit there had been 7 of us, and the ship talked to herself all the time. The murmur of the plant, somebody's footsteps, 2 compartments over, Marchetti's music leaking under a hatch, Belle laughing at something 2 rooms away. The boat does not talk. The boat is small and quiet, and the drive is a soft, steady breath under everything. And past that there is nothing. No footsteps, no music, no laughing. Only me and my own 2 hands, and the cold spoon by the bunk, and the dark pressing on the ports. And in that silence, the crew came to keep me company, whether I wanted them or not. Not ghosts. I do not think I mean ghosts. I mean that when a room is that quiet for that long, your own mind starts to fill it, and it fills it with the voices it has, and the voices I have are theirs. I would be at the console and hear Cutter's short, surprised bark of a laugh from behind me, clear as anything, and turn, and there would be the empty little cabin and the dark in the ports. I would half wake certain I had heard Sella reading out loud, low and even, a page from one of her paper books, and lie there straining to catch the words, and there would be only the soft breath of the drive. I do not think they were really there. I think a mind alone in the dark for months makes what it needs, and I needed them, so it made them, and I have decided to be grateful for it instead of afraid of it, because a man has to decide something about the voices in a quiet boat, and grateful is the only decision that lets me keep flying, and I am a careful man, and I keep flying. The cold started in the boat about 6 weeks out. I noticed it the way I noticed everything, doing my rounds, because even alone in a can the size of a closet, I did my rounds, morning and night, the reclaimer and the drive and the stores and the hull, the same order every time, my hand on each system, my eyes on each gauge. And one morning, 6 weeks out, give or take, I came up the little length of the boat's one passage from the bunk to the console, and my breath showed in front of my face, and the panel on the wall told me the boat was a comfortable 68 degrees. I stood there a long time. I am not going to pretend I did not know what I was looking at. I knew exactly what I was looking at. I had lived it once already, and I had watched a dead woman on the Osprey live it before me, and I stood in the passage of my little boat with my breath hanging in the air in front of a panel that showed 68, and I felt something in me go quiet and old, the way you go quiet when the worst thing you know has come back around and sat down across from you and folded its hands. Then I did what I am. I checked the heater. The boat's heat plant is small and simple, nothing like the Ambit's. A person can put their hands on the whole of it, and I put my hands on the whole of it, and it was fine. It was making exactly what it should, every reading clean. I ran the diagnostic twice, and it came back clean twice, and I stood there afterward and watched my breath hang in the air, and I thought, that is not 68 degrees, that is closer to 40. And a panel does not lie unless something behind it is lying for it. And I heard myself think it in the exact words I had thought them in the aft corridor of the Ambit all those months ago, before any of it, when I was a man who told himself the sensor was bad, and I understood that I had come all the way around the circle, that I was back at the start, that everything in between had been a long, cold way of arriving exactly here, at a clean diagnostic and a breath in the air and a careful man deciding what to call it. I did not decide to call it a bad sensor this time. That is the one thing I can say for myself. I have paid too much to lie about the cold anymore. So I called it what it was, which is that I do not know, and I am not going to know, and there are only 3 things it can be. It can be the boat, a real fault, mundane, a leak in the insulation, a sensor drifting, the kind of thing that happens to old craft in the deep cold. And if it is that, then I am a frightened man reading a ghost story into a maintenance issue, and I hope with everything left in me that that is what it is. And I do not believe it, because I checked, and I am good at checking, and there is nothing to find. It can be the hull. It can be that the thing that was Belle, spread flat and drinking on the Ambit's skin, felt the ship go cold behind me and let go and drifted to the next warm thing in the dark, which was the boat, which was me, and that it is out there right now on the plating over my head, spread flat, arms and legs wide, pressed against the last warm thing in 100 million kilometers, drinking my heat out through the hull, the same slow, patient way, and that the reason my breath shows in a boat that reads 68 is that there is a mouth on the far side of the metal taking. I have looked at the hull camera. The boat has one, a little fisheye that shows the dorsal plating. I have looked at it more times than I am going to admit. There is nothing on it. There is the plating and the stars in the dark, and no shape spread flat against the metal, nothing, and that should comfort me, and it does not. Because the Ambit's camera showed me the bell thing plain as day, and this one shows me nothing, and I do not know if that means there is nothing there, or if it means the thing has learned the way it learned the glass test, the way it learns everything, off watching us, that we look at the cameras, and is simply moved to where the camera does not see. A careful man does not think too hard about the parts of his own hull the camera does not see. I am a careful man, I think about it all the time. And it can be me. That is the third thing, and it is the one I do the steel for twice a day, more, and it is the one I cannot check any other way, because there is no camera for the inside of a man. It can be that whatever rode the boat out of that ship rode it out inside me, that I took it aboard the same small human way Bell took it aboard, some moment I do not remember, a bare hand somewhere, a breath, and that it is in me now, cold and patient, putting me out the way you put out a lamp, so slow that living inside it there is no change at all, only the way things are, adjusting a little every day, and that the reason the boat reads warm and feels cold is that the cold is not in the boat, the cold is in the man reading the panel, and that one of these mornings I am going to breathe on the steel, and it is going to stay clear, and I am going to see it, and I am going to know that I have been recording videos for my daughter with a mouth that stopped being a mouth weeks ago, holding my dead palm up to an empty camera, saying I love you, Nell, with a voice that comes across a cold country before it reaches the words. I breathe on the steel. It fogs. Every time. So far, it fogs. I am still me, so far, this morning. This one more morning. The signal came about a week after the cold started. I was at the console, on the long dead middle of a ship's night, and the boat's radio, which had had nothing on it but static and the far thin whisper of the relays I was still months from reaching. The boat's radio caught something, and I heard it before I saw the light on the panel. I heard it come up out of the static, and I knew it, and my whole body went cold, my actual body, my skin, because it was a carrier signal, an open channel, someone transmitting, holding the channel open, and no one talking, an open mic over a dead room, the exact sound, the exact quality of quiet, that Scylla and I had heard over Marchetti's suit in the aft bay, that the whole company had heard in the last transmissions of the Osprey, a carrier with nobody behind it, an open channel with a cold room on the far end. It was on the Ambit's frequency. It was on Halverson's channel, the captain's private band, the one only she used. I sat at the console with my hand not quite touching the panel, and I listened to the carrier signal on my dead captain's channel, coming from behind me, from the direction of the Marrow, from the ship I had left burning or not burning in the dark, and I listened to the quiet on the far end of it, the open mic over the cold room, and I did not answer it. I want that known. Whatever it was, whoever, whatever, was holding that channel open on Halverson's band across all those months and all those kilometers, I did not answer it. I sat with my hand near the panel for what the clock later told me was 3 hours, and I listened to it breathe, or not breathe, that is the thing. I listened for it to breathe, and it never did. 3 hours of open channel, and not one sound of a living breath. On the far end, just the carrier, just the quiet, just the cold room, and near the end of the 3 hours, so faint I have never been able to swear. I did not make it up out of the wanting, the way I make everything up out of the wanting. Near the end, I thought I heard, under the carrier, far away, a voice. It said, "Get home to your girl, Doyle." And then the signal was gone, all at once, clean, the channel dead, the static back, and I sat there in the cold of my warm boat with my breath hanging in the air, and I did not know. I will never know. Whether that was Dana Halverson alive somehow in the wreck of my ship holding her channel open across the dark to tell me one more time to go home, or whether it was the thing wearing her patient in no hurry, having learned off 2 days of watching me exactly what warm words to put in her mouth, reaching out across 100 million kilometers to keep a father calm and moving and flying home, 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 carrying the warm right to the one place in all the system where the warm things are. I did not answer it. I have not answered it. It has not come again. I breathe on the steel. It fogs. I hold my palm up to the empty camera. I am a careful man, and I am going home to my girl, and I do not measure the marrow, and I do not look too long at the parts of the hull the camera does not see, and I do not answer the channel, and I breathe on the steel, and it fogs. One more morning, and I am still me. I found the frost in the number 2 store's locker in the 3rd month. I was doing my rounds, the stores, after the drive, my hand on each system, and I opened the number 2 locker for the daily count, and the inside of it was furred white, not the whole locker. A patch up in the back corner, feathered frost standing up off the metal, a finger deep, the exact grown frost of the Osprey's corridors, of Bell's cabin, of everything the cold had touched, and it was in my boat, in my stores, in a locker I had opened and counted clean the day before. I stood there with the locker door in my hand, and I looked at the patch of frost, and my breath fogged in front of it thick, because that corner of the boat was colder than 40 now. That corner was cold the way the Osprey was cold, and I understood that it did not matter anymore which of the 3 things it was, the boat, or the hull, or the man, because whichever it was winning. It was patient, and it was cold, and it had all the time there ever was, and I had 1 boat and 5 months and a locker growing frost in the corner, and it was winning. I sealed the locker. I moved the stores I needed most into the warm end of the boat, up by the console, close to me, close to the little heat plant, the way Bell had moved himself to the warm bulkhead. And I heard myself think that, close to the warm, the way Bell did. And I made myself stop thinking it, because that way is a bad way and I know where it goes. I sealed the coal locker, and I did not open it again. Some questions you stop asking. The frost is in there. It is spreading or it is not spreading. I am not going to look. I am a careful man, and looking is not always the careful thing. I have learned that. I have paid for it. Sometimes the careful thing is to seal the locker and move your warm close and not look at the cold coming. Because there is nothing you can do about the cold coming. There was never anything any of us could do. The Osprey could not, and the Ambit could not, and I cannot. All you can do is decide how you spend the warm you have left, and I am spending mine on the recordings, on the steel, on getting home to my girl, and I am not spending 1 more minute of it looking into a locker to watch the frost win. I went back through my recordings that night, all of them, the whole stack, 100 and some, her father talking to a camera in a cold room, all the way back to the first ones from before the Marrow, before the Osprey, from 3 months out and 4 and 5, when everything was fine, and the worst thing in my life was missing a 9-year-old on series. I told myself I was watching them for comfort, to see her in my mind, to remember why I was flying, and that was a lie, a warm lie I told myself, because I know exactly what I was watching them for. I was watching them for the fog. Every one of those recordings I made in a cold room. The Ambit ran cool, 60 and dropping, and later the boat. And in every single recording my breath should show a little cloud in front of my face as I talked to my daughter, because that is what a warm man's breath does in a cold room. It fogs. It cannot help it. It is what warm blood does. So I went back through them, all of them, in order, watching the air in front of my own face in 100 and some little videos, watching for the fog, looking for the one, the first one, where it stops. I want to tell you I did not find it. I want to tell you that in every recording, all the way to the newest, my breath showed clean and white and warm, and there was no doubt, and I was still me the whole time, all the way back and all the way up to now. That is not what I found. What I found is that I could not tell. The early one's fog, thick and clear, no question. That is a warm man talking to his girl. And somewhere in the middle they get fainter, and it is not a line. There is no clean line. There is never a clean line. It is a temperature. It comes for you in a temperature, and the fog gets fainter and fainter across the recordings. The same slow way the ship got colder. The same slow way everything went wrong. So gradual that no single video is different from the one before it. And I sat there in the dead middle of a ship's night, playing my own face, over and over, my own breath, looking for the moment I stopped. And there is no moment. There is only the slow fading. And I do not know if that is the cold in the rooms getting deeper or the warm in the man getting thinner. I cannot tell them apart. The recordings cannot tell them apart. And I turned them off, finally, near dawn, with my hands shaking. And I have not watched them since, except the last thing I did. Before I turned them off, I made myself watch the newest one, the one from the night before. And I leaned close to the screen, the way Adeyemi leaned close to his camera, and I watched the air in front of my own recorded face as I told my daughter goodnight. And I held my palm up to her at the end, the way I always do, and I watched, and there was, I think, the faintest ghost of a fog, the kind you cannot swear to, maybe there and maybe just your eyes making a shape out of the wanting. And I thought about how that is exactly what Halvorson's breath looked like in the warm boat bay. The faintest ghost, maybe there and maybe not. And I thought about how I let myself send her off to die on the strength of a fog I could not swear to. And now here I was studying the same unswearable fog in my own recorded face. And I turned it off. And I sat in the dark. And I did not do the steal. That one time, that one night. I could not. I was too afraid of what it would show. That is the closest I have come. One night, near dawn, in the 3rd month, I held the steel in my hand, and I could not make myself breathe on it, because I did not want to know, and I sat there holding it, and that is the exact thing. That is the exact thing that a careful man does not do. And I did it for one night, and in the morning I did the steel again, and it fogged, faint, but it fogged, and I was still me. And I promised myself I would never set the steel down again out of fear. And I have kept that promise. It is the only promise I have left to keep. The Marrow has been in my dreams since the frost. Not the crew, though the crew are there too. Bell telling a joke I cannot hear the end of. Sella with her paper books. Marchetti with her light. Halvorson's faraway smile. They are all there. They are always there. I have stopped expecting them to leave. But under the crew, behind them, in the dreams, there is the Marrow, the dark world, the wound in the stars. And in the dreams I understand things about it that I do not want to understand and cannot hold on to when I wake. I understand how long it has been cold. That is the one that stays with me a little into the waking before it fades. In the dream I understand, in my body and not just as a number, how long that world has been falling through the dark with the lights off, how long the thing on it has been cold and waiting. And it is not a length of time a person can hold. It is longer than the sun. It is longer than the light. It is a cold, so old that our whole warm, brief, noisy history of ships and crews and daughters on series is a single match struck and gone out in a dark that was there before the match and will be there after. And the thing in that dark felt our match. Felt all of us, the osprey and the ambit, felt us the way you feel warmth on your face across a freezing room, and it turned toward us, slow, patient, in no hurry, because it has waited longer than there has been anything to wait for, and a few more months, or years, or centuries, to reach the warm, is nothing to it, is less than nothing, and in the dream, I understand that it is still turning toward us, toward all of us, toward the whole warm, noisy inner system, full of stations and cities and children with their palms pressed to screens, and that I am flying home, 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 and that home is exactly where it wants to go, and that I am the warm thing showing it the way. Then I wake up in the cold, in my warm boat, with my breath in the air, and I breathe on the steel, and it fogs, and I check the reclaimer, and I do not measure the Marrow, and I do not open the locker, and I fly home. The relays came into range in the 5th month, and with them came the choice I had been not thinking about the whole way home, the way I had not thought about the arithmetic of 4 seats and 5 people, leaving it as a shape under a sheet until the shape made itself into a person and there was no more sheet to leave it under. The choice was this. I could talk to people again. The boat's radio, which had nothing on it but static and a dead captain's carrier signal, started to catch the near relays, the automated buoys that mark the edge of the inhabited dark, and past them the far thin edge of real traffic, ships and stations. And someday soon a woman on Ceres, who did not know yet whether her brother's husband was alive or dead, I could send. Not a conversation, not yet, the lag was still hours each way, but I could send, and someone would hear, and someone would answer. And after 5 months alone, in a can the size of a closet with a locker full of frost, and a channel I would not answer, and a stack of recordings I could not watch, the wanting to send was so strong it frightened me almost as much as the cold did, because here is the thing I had to decide. I had to decide what to tell them. I could tell them the truth. I could send the whole of it, the Osprey and the Marrow and the Rule and the Glass and every name. Bell and Cutter and Marchetti and Sella and Okafor and Dana Halverson, who died so a father could reach his girl. I could send it all and beg them to believe me and beg them not to do the thing I knew they were going to do, which was send another ship, because they were going to send another ship. The ambit had gone dark the same slow way the Osprey went dark, my last transmissions trailing off into gaps and silence just like Adiemi's, and the company was going to wait a decent interval, which for the company means until the insurance clears, and then it was going to put together a 3rd contract and a 3rd crew, and it was not going to put in the brief that they were flying to a place that had eaten 2 ships. It was going to put in the brief, complete the survey, and recover the vessels if practicable. And 7 more warm people were going to fly out to the wound in the stars and stand on the coldest ground in the reach of the sun and feel it turn toward them, and it would have all of them the way it had the others. And it would be my fault, because I lived, because I was the one who got to come home and tell it, and telling it was the only thing that might stop it, and telling it might be the very thing the cold wanted. That was the part I could not get around. That was the part that kept me from sending for 2 full weeks after the relays came into range. 2 weeks, with my hand near the panel, the way I had held my hand near the panel, through 3 hours of a dead captain's carrier signal, not quite touching it, afraid of it, because I do not know what I am. I have told you that it is the truest thing in the whole account. I do not know what I am. The steel still fogs, but the boat is warming as I come in toward the sun, and the fog gets harder to read every day. And if the thing is in me, if it has been in me since some moment I do not remember out there in the cold, then it wants exactly what a warm, rescued survivor would want. It wants to be believed. It wants to be brought in close to all the warm people. It wants a ship sent back to the Marrow to carry more warm out into the dark, and there is no way for me to tell the difference between Doyle wanting to warn the system and the cold wanting to use Doyle's mouth to bait it. Every warm, true thing I might send could be the thing wearing me, reaching out across the relays the way it reached out across Halverson's channel, patient, in no hurry, saying exactly what a father would say, exactly what a survivor would say, exactly what you would believe. So I did not send the truth. Not at first. What I sent, after 2 weeks, was small, and it was careful, and it was as much of the truth as I could trust myself to send, and no more. I sent that the ambit was lost. I sent that I was the only survivor inbound on the survey boat requesting recovery. I sent that the Marrow, the dark world, the object, was not safe, that under no circumstances should another vessel approach it, that it had killed the osprey and it had killed the ambit and it would kill anything warm that came near it, and that I would explain in person on the ground in a room with a door that locked and not before. And then I sent one thing more, the only thing I let myself add, because I could not help it, because a man is allowed one warm thing even at the end of the world. I sent, for the attention of a family on Ceres, that Doyle was alive and coming home to his girl. And then I sat back from the panel and I watched the scent light go dark, and I waited the long hours for an answer. And while I waited, I did the steel, and the steel fogged, faint, so faint now in the warming boat that I had to hold it right up under my nose and breathe hard and stare. And there was a bloom on it. There was the faintest ghost of a bloom. And I told myself that was the warm cabin and not a cold man. I told myself the boat is warming as I come in toward the sun. Of course the fog is fainter. That is physics. That is just a warm room. A warm room does not fog a breath. There is nothing wrong with the man. And I heard myself tell myself that. And I heard underneath it the dead reclamation tech on the Osprey saying the heat plant is fine. And I heard myself in the aft corridor of the ambit saying the sensor is bad, and I understood that I was doing it again, the oldest thing, the first thing, the thing I swore I would never do again. I was looking straight at the glass and deciding to call it something else. The answer came 6 hours later. It was a company voice, calm and pleasant and a little slow, and it thanked me for my transmission, and it told me a recovery tug was being vectored to meet me inside the month. And it told me that my report regarding the object was noted and would be reviewed by the appropriate department. And it told me, in the same calm, pleasant, slow voice, that a survey of the object designated in my transmission had already been scheduled, contract awarded, crew assigned, departure inside the quarter, and that my first-hand knowledge would be, and here the voice paused, one beat, one small beat. The way a thing pauses when it is choosing a warm word, my first-hand knowledge would be valuable. Valuable. Okafor's word. The word Okafor used about the thing spread against our hull. I sat in the boat and I listened to a calm, pleasant, slow, company voice, a beat too late, tell me that another ship was already going to the Marrow and that my knowledge would be valuable, and I could not tell. Across all those hours of lag and all those kilometers of dark, I could not tell if I was hearing a bored dispatcher in a warm office who did not believe a word of my ghost story, or if I was hearing something else, something that had already reached ahead of me somehow, that was already home, already in the warm places, already wearing the calm, pleasant faces of the people who send the ships. And I understood, sitting there, that this was never going to end, that I had never been running away from it, that the whole system was warm and it wanted the warm and it had all the time there ever was, and that I was flying home into the middle of it with a locker full of frost and a breath I could no longer read, and that the appropriate department would review my report, and that a crew was already assigned. The last month was the warmest, and that was the worst thing about it. The boat came in toward the sun a little more every day, and the sun, even that far out, even as just the brightest star in a crowded sky, was warmth, real warmth. The first warmth from outside that little craft in 5 months, and the boat drank it the way a cold thing drinks warmth, and the cabin came up, degree by degree, off 40 and toward 50, and past it, and the frost in the sealed number 2 locker stopped growing. I could feel it stop through the sealed door, the cold easing back, losing ground for the first time since the Marrow, and any other man on any other voyage would have wept with relief at a warming ship after 5 months of cold. I did not weep with relief. I understood what a warming ship meant. It meant the steel would stop fogging, not because the man had stopped breathing, because the room had stopped being cold. A warm room does not fog a breath. That is not the test failing. That is just physics. That is the whole cruelty of the test, and it was coming for me. Now, the way everything came for me. Slow. A temperature. The one thing that could tell me what I was only worked in the cold. And I was flying out of the cold, home into the warm, and every degree the cabin came up was a degree of proof I lost. until one morning in the last month I held the steel right up under my nose, in a cabin that showed a warm and pleasant 52, and I breathed on it, hard, and I stared, and the steel stayed clear. Clear. Nothing. No bloom. Not even the ghost of one. I stood there with the steel in my shaking hand, and I did the arithmetic, the only arithmetic left, and it came out two ways, and it will always come out two ways. And I get to choose which morning I believe which one, the same as the flare, the same as the carrier signal, the same as everything the Marrow ever gave me. Either the cabin is warm now, truly warm, 52 degrees, and a living man's breath does not fog a 52-degree room, and the clear steel means nothing at all, means only that I am home, that I have flown out of the cold and into the warm, and my breath has nothing left to fog against, and I am still me, and the test has simply run out of cold to work in. Or the man has run out of warmth, the way the room ran out of cold, the two of them meeting in the middle at a clear piece of steel, and I have been gone for weeks, for the whole warming stretch of the voyage home, gone since some morning when the fog got too faint to swear to, and I told myself it was the warm cabin, and I have been flying home the whole time with a mouth that does not breathe, holding my dead palm up to an empty camera, telling a girl on Ceres I love her in a voice that comes across a cold country before it reaches the words. I cannot tell. There is no cold left to tell it in. That was always how it was going to end. It was going to end in a warm room with a clear piece of steel and a careful man deciding what to call it, and I have decided this morning to call it the warm cabin, because I am going home to my girl, and a man has to be able to walk through a door. And I cannot walk through the door I am about to walk through if I let myself believe the other thing. So I have decided, and I know exactly what I have decided. I have looked straight at the clear glass and decided to call it something else. And it is the first thing I did all those months ago in the aft corridor of the ambit, and it is the last thing I am doing now. And I have come all the way around the circle, and there is no getting off it. There was never any getting off it. There is only deciding what to call the cold. The recovery tug found me a week out from the inner relays. She came up on me careful, all thrusters and patience, the way you approach a thing that has been out past everything and might be bringing something back. And I watched her grow on the forward screen the way I had watched the Osprey grow, the way I had watched the Marrow grow. Another ship swimming up out of the dark toward me, and this one had warm people in it. 4 of them. A small recovery crew, warm and alive and whole. And they hailed me on the open channel, and a woman's voice, ordinary, tired, kind, said my name, said, "Doyle, we have got you. You are almost home." And I heard the warmth in it, the plain human warmth of a person who is glad you are alive, and I wanted it so badly, after 5 months, the warmth of another living voice. I wanted it the way the thing on the Marrow wants the warm. And that is when I knew I had to say the thing I had been deciding whether to say the whole way in. I told them not to bring me aboard warm. I told them to keep the transfer lock cold, cold as they could make it, cold enough to see a breath, and to hold me in it, alone, sealed, before they let me one step further into their warm ship. And I told them why. I told them about the glass. I told them the one rule the whole dead voyage had cost. The rule Adeyemi died giving me, and I have lived giving myself every morning since. Watch the glass. If a man's breath does not show, he stopped being a man a while back. And I told them to make it cold and watch me breathe. And if I fogged the glass, to bring me in and take me home. And if I did not fog the glass, if I stood in that cold lock and breathed, and nothing showed, then to seal the outer door and blow it, and put me out into the dark, and not to wait, and not to try to fix it, because there is no fixing it, and to tell a family on Ceres that Doyle died coming home, and that he did everything right at the end, that he made them keep the lock cold, that he was careful, tell her he was careful. There was a long silence on the channel, the lag, and something more than the lag. And then the tired, kind, ordinary woman's voice came back, and it said they would keep the lock cold, and I could hear that she believed maybe 1/10 of what I had told her and was humoring the rest, humoring the broken survivor of a ship that ate its crew, and that was all right. A tenth was enough. A tenth was a cold lock and a witness. That was all I needed. That was all any of us ever needed, and almost never had. I am recording this in the last hour before the transfer. The recovery tug is matched to me now, station keeping 100 meters off, and I can see her lights, warm and yellow and steady in the forward port. 4 warm people over there getting a cold lock ready for a man who asked them to. And in a little while, I am going to cross that 100 meters and cycle into their lock and stand in the cold and breathe on the glass in front of 4 strangers. And I am going to find out, or I am not going to find out, because a warm-hearted crew getting a lock as cold as they can get it in an hour is not the coldest ground in the reach of the sun. It is not 200 below. It may only be cold enough to fog a living breath, and not cold enough to be sure. And then I will be standing in a not quite cold enough lock in front of 4 strangers, deciding one more time what to call the glass. And so will they. I have made my last recording for Nell. I made it before this one. I told her about the stars. I told her I am almost home. I told her about the place I am going to buy us, the one with real air and a window that looks at something green. And I told her I love her. And I held my palm up to the camera the way I always do, palm out, the way I used to hold it up to her small hand pressed against the screen, and I held it there, and I breathed toward the lens, the way I always do without meaning to, a warm man saying good night to his girl. And I watched the little glass eye of the camera to see if my breath would fog it. The cabin is warm now, 52 degrees, and climbing, the sun growing in the ports. A warm room does not fog a breath. There is nothing wrong with the man. I held my palm up to my daughter and I said, "Good night, Nell, and I love you," and I breathed toward the glass, and the glass stayed clear, and I have decided to call it the warm cabin. They are cycling the lock. I can see the light on it go from red to green through the forward port, the cold lock ready for me. In a minute I am going to cross the dark between the 2 ships, the last 100 meters of 100 million, and I am going to breathe on the glass in front of 4 warm strangers who half believe me, and one of us is going to look at what shows or does not show and decide what to call it. The outer door of their lock is opening now. I can see the warm yellow light of their ship spill out of it into the dark, spill out toward me, toward the boat, toward the last warm thing out here, and I am going in. I am going home. I am holding my palm up. My breath does not fog the port glass in front of me, and the cabin is warm, and I am a careful man, and the light is so warm, and it is coming, and I am going into it, and